morning, everyone. Do we have quorum? Yes, we do. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1 to 3 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments, and if you are here and wanting to speak, or if you're upstairs in the Champlain room, although I don't know if anyone is up there yet, and you want to speak, please let our coordinator, who is just outside the doors, know, and your name will be added to the bottom of the list. So, committee members, any declarations of interest? Councillor Shirelli?
A potential deemed indirect pecuniary interest on Planning Committee Agenda Item 54.3, Official Plan Amendment and Zoning Bylaw 325, 327, and 333 Montreal Road, 334 Montfort Street, and 273 St. Anne Avenue. As my daughter is employed at Shepherds of Good Hope, an organization that is within the same funding bracket as Salvation Army, the applicant mentioned, and could see its operations affected by the changes associated with this application should it proceed.
Okay, just for those here in the chamber that may not know this, that means that you're recusing yourself from the discussion on item number 3. Okay, thank you. And just for anyone in the room, if you're looking for simultaneous interpretation of both official languages, we have it available for you and for all members of the committee and visiting council members that aren't on the committee. Confirmation of minutes from the meeting of October 24th, 2017. Are they carried? Carried. Okay, so the first item on the agenda today is the zoning bylaw amendment, 250 Vanguard Drive. We have one speaker who is here in favor. Does any member of council have any questions? Mr. Michael Wright, can you identify yourself, please? Do you need to speak, sir, if we're prepared to carry this? Thank you. Thank you very much. So on this item, is it carried? Carried. Thank you. Item number 2 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 2144 East Acres Road. We have no speakers. Does anyone have any questions? Is this item carried? Thank you. The next item is the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 325, 327, and 333 Montreal Road, 334 Montfort Street, and 273 St. Anne Avenue. And we're holding that because we have a lot of speakers and we have a presentation to boot. Thank you, Councillor Shirelli. So, we're down to just one item on the agenda, and normally with just one item I'd say that's a light agenda and that we would be wrapped up before noon. But that's obviously not going to be the case here. The Salvation Army is seeking amendments to the official plan, the zoning bylaw, and the Montreal Road District Secondary Plan to permit a residential care facility, a shelter, and surface parking on their property on Montreal Road. As you can see by the number of the people in the room, there's a lot of interest in the proposal that's before us today. Comme vous pouvez le constater par le nom.
As you can see from the number of people present in the room, the amendment that we are reviewing today has a lot of interest.
Facility. I want to thank the community members who have been so active and engaged on this file. The future of this corner of Vanier will be shaped in cooperation between engaged residents and an organization that wants to be an integral part of the community. Ideally, both sides will continue to work to find solutions and compromise that will result in a better development and a better community for all. Right now, however, we have a planning application to consider and a recommendation from our city planning staff. It's important to keep in mind that while there has clearly been strong interest from the community, the rules and indeed the powers of Planning Committee in its consideration of this application are the same as for any other planning committee. At the end of the day, our decision must relate to the land use of the proposed application and must be based on sound land use planning principles. Concerns regarding the neighborhood or social impact of this development are appropriate, but must relate to the land use and not the users of the proposal. For example, the committee may consider the social or neighborhood impact of allowing 350 additional occupants into the neighborhood, but not social or neighborhood impact of allowing impoverished single men into the neighborhood. Accordingly, questions relating to the following are out of order at this committee. 1, any potential federal, provincial, or municipal funding for this applicant. 2, any alternative programs for potential users. 3, the activities or characteristics of the potential users, including smoking, criminal behavior, or drug use. The city's 10-year housing and homelessness plan and the Housing First program model. We also have over 150 people who have already signed up to tell us their thoughts on what we need to consider about this development and about the staff recommendations. So we're going to take the time we need to listen, and then we're going to discuss the proposed facility. For that reason, we've set aside 3 days in the council chambers to listen to what people think about this application. Nous avons donc prévu 3 jours.
So we have 3 days in this room in order to listen to what people are thinking about this application.
To be in this room as a standing committee, but it's a bigger space than the Champlain room where we normally meet, and better able to accommodate a larger audience. And this was important for Vice Chair Tierney and myself when we were talking about how this would be set up. It's important that you're not cramped out into a hallway, etc., that you're here and you're able to attend and listen, and for our colleagues around the table, in the Champlain room with so many colleagues here, I don't even know where you'd be sitting. So this was the right choice. And to handle any overflow crowds, we have also set up the Champlain room, so you can follow along with the proceedings from there just as easily as from here. Before we begin, I'm going to set out how we expect each day to go, so the councillors and the public have a sense of what is happening. We're scheduled to finish at 5:30 today. We'll start again in this room tomorrow at 9:30 and finish at 5. If necessary, we'll be back here again on Friday from 9:30 until 5:30. Nous devons terminer à 17 heures.
We have to finish at 5:30 today. We will begin again tomorrow in this room at 9:30, and we'll finish at 5. If needed, we will come back here on Friday from 9:30 to 5:30.
At 12:30, and I ask that everybody be prompt in returning here so that we stay on schedule as much as possible. If you're wondering why we're not meeting on Thursday, it's because the Community and Protective Services Committee will be meeting that day, and the rules don't permit committees to meet at the same time. So we'll take a break that day. It's great that there are so many interested people here, but I'm guessing there are some rules we follow that people who have never been here before might not be aware of. So please be patient while I explain. If you have registered as a public delegation, you will want to pay attention to these instructions, especially if you've never presented to a committee before. Les délégations publiques inscrites.
The public delegations have to take these instructions into account, especially if it's their first presentation before a committee.
Introductory remarks, I will ask the city planning staff to come forward and make a presentation about their report and their recommendation to approve the application. After that presentation, we'll begin hearing from public delegations. Public delegations are called in the order they signed up, so we can't guarantee what time you will be called to make your presentation. You can visit the sign-up desk from time to time to see where you are on the speakers list. Again, that's just outside the doors here, but you need to listen for myself or Vice Chair Tierney to call your name. When we call your name, make your way to the table, which is that table where I'm pointing right there, and take a seat at the spot marked for public delegations. And you'll see there's 3 signs there that say public delegations. Lorsque nous vous appellerons.
When we call you, please make your way to the table and sit down on the right for public delegations.
And plain room. So when I call a public delegation, I will also announce the next 2 names on the list to give them time to make their way to council chambers. When called, I ask that you take a seat at the table, even if it's not your turn. If you're one of the 3 people that's in line to speak, please have a seat. There should be enough chairs, and there will be. Once you start your presentation, you will have 5 minutes to finish. On that, I will make no exceptions. Vice Chair Tierney is going to be helping me with that. We will advise you when there is 1 minute remaining so that you can wrap up with any concluding remarks, and again when there's 30 seconds remaining. Because we want to be fair to everyone, I will be strict about halting presentations at the 5-minute mark. Comme nous voulons être équitable.
Since we want to be fair to everyone, I'll be very strict as to the 5 minutes allocated for the presentations.
And keeping a firm limit on presentation time means we can hear from as many of you as possible every day. We need to respect the fact that you all have busy lives and that you have taken time out of your schedules to be here. When you finish your presentation to the committee, just remain seated, and I will ask my council colleagues if they have any questions for you before they leave the table. And on this, I want to be really clear to my fellow councillors on this next point. I'm only going to allow questions to a public delegation if the speaker has raised concerns relating to planning principles. I
will authorize questions to a public delegation if the presenter has raised a concern about planning principles.
Received a memo from the city clerk and solicitor earlier this month explaining the need to restrict the scope of our discussion on this file. We need to remember that committee's decision on this matter must be based on planning principles and not on considerations like social housing policy, how well shelters work, or how this facility might be funded in the future once it is built. These concerns are outside the jurisdiction of this committee and are not related to land use planning principles. Limiting questions in this way will ensure that whatever decision is made by this committee is based on relevant considerations. The bulk of the day will be spent hearing from speakers. About 45 minutes before the end of the day, we will halt public delegations for that day. Environ 45 minutes avant la fin.
About 45 minutes before the end of the day, we will suspend presentations from public delegations.
5 minutes to ask questions of planning staff based on what we heard throughout the day. And that will be the opportunity to ask questions of planning staff. It's standard to hold questions of staff arising from the delegations until after we have heard from all the delegations. But in this case, I think it will be important for us to ask those questions while the presenter's issues are still very much in mind. Because we will only have 45 minutes at the end of the day for questions, I believe it will be most efficient if councillors write their questions of staff down and submit them either as we go along or at the break. You can write your questions and provide them to Ms. Nedden, and she will direct them to the appropriate staff. Or you can email questions, as is the normal route, to the motions inbox. And if anyone doesn't have that address, please let us know. Any registered public delegations that are still on the speakers list at the end of the day will automatically be added to the start of the list for the next day. If you are signed up and need to leave before you are called, or if you can't make it back for the next day of meetings, you can submit your comments in writing to the staff at the sign-up table or by email to the committee coordinator. Si vous êtes inscrit et que
if you have to leave before the end, before you've been called, you can come back the next day. You can also submit your comments to staff at the registration table or by email and the coordinator.
Be circulated to all members of council. You can still sign up if you haven't yet done so, but please know that you will be replaced at the end of the speakers list as a whole, not the end of today's speakers list. Your name will be called in order. This meeting format will be the same for all 3 days, except there won't be a staff presentation every day. Only today. Once we have heard from all public delegations, there will be one more round of questions of staff, and then we will have our final discussion as a committee before we come to a decision. With respect to motions, I am recommending that we use an approach whereby all amendments are tabled and referred to council with the direction to staff that they provide comments on the proposed amendments prior to council consideration. This is a practice we have followed in the past for some of the more larger files that we have considered at committee. It will ensure we have the most complete advice from our staff before voting. Vice Chair Tierney has agreed to move all the motions presented by any committee members. I know that Councillor Cloutier has one that he would like to move, but otherwise, Vice Chair Tierney is happy to move motions. One final thing before we get going. I know that people are passionate about this issue, but I want to take a moment to make it very clear that applause is not permitted. Je sais que cette question soulève des...
I know that this raises a lot of passion, but I'd like to take a few moments to say that clapping is not allowed.
Respectful way to have a public discourse. So I will be very strict on that too. No cheering and no booing. I know that some of you in the audience have probably never been to a committee meeting before, and I know it can be confusing. I hope this introduction helps make it a bit clearer how we're going to proceed over the next few days. J'espère avoir un peu...
I hope that I've clarified the procedure that we will follow over the next few days.
Planning staff to start their presentation, but before I do, I want to introduce our Director of Planning, Ms. Leanne Snedden, who is sitting, want to wave there, Leanne? Mr. John Smith, who is our Director of Economic Development and Long-Term Planning, Long-Range Planning. We also have our legal staff under the direction of our City Clerk and City Solicitor, Mr. Rick O'Connor. We have Samantha Montre, who is one of our lawyers on this file, and Christina. Mahan. It's Mahan, isn't it? Is it Mahan? Mann. Okay. Christina Mann. Thank you. And then over here on this side, we have Erin O'Connell. She is the lead planner on the file. She's going to be giving the presentation. Beside her is her manager, Doug James, who is in charge of development review for the central area, and Steve Gauthier, who is another planner that's working on this file as well. So now with that, oh, seriously? Before the presentation?
Madam Chair, thank you for that overview of the ground rules before we get going. Can I just ask if colleagues have motions that are ready and available to share, that they either email them to members so we can look at them, think about them. They may be germane to ask questions to some of our delegations, but rather than wait to the very end when motions come on the floor, if they're ready and they want to release them, I'm just throwing that out there. It would be helpful
okay,
for me.
So we'll get them ready to put up, and we'll find a place to have that, to let you know when they're there. Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Brockington. Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of committee. What we have before us today is an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for a property largely on Montreal Road. What I will be speaking to is the process of this application, the location, the context, what's being proposed before us, the policy context, and why ultimately our department is recommending approval.
I'd like to emphasize that the most important slides have been translated. If you want more translations, I will gladly translate them.
To speak louder as we go on. I think it's some people probably would have a hard time hearing. Thank you.
Sure, certainly, Madam Chair. The process followed for this application has been standard of that for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. However, the city did also provide and prepare a website to direct information on the applications, the process, and the timelines. This is a screenshot from the process slide that was a part of that city website. The project will go to the Urban Design Review Panel as part of the site plan control matters following the decision from Planning Committee and Council. So we're at step 7 right now in the process. Through this process, approximately 800 residents have provided comment and or their contact information to myself or Steve in the form of hard copy comment, email, voicemail, or signing a submitted petition. The addresses for this property include a large parcel that has 3 municipal addresses, 325, 327, and 333 Montreal Road. A site at 273 St. Anne Avenue is included in the proposed development, and as is part of 334 Montfort Street. The proposal is to sever off part of the site, which includes the existing Salvation Army thrift store, resulting in the following site. The site itself is located between the Vanier Parkway and Saint Laurent Boulevard. It's adjacent to Gabriel's Pizza to the east. It's surrounded by a low-rise residential area to the north, and then surface parking, low-rise commercial, and low to high-rise residential uses along Montreal Road. The site itself is about 7,000 square meters without the thrift store property. It has 15 meters of frontage on Montreal Road, 13 meters on St. Anne, and 5 meters on Montfort. This is a photo showing the existing site, which includes the Concord Motel, which would be demolished as part of this proposed development. Where the existing Concord Motel and driveway exists and would be demolished is 14.95 meters of frontage on Montreal Road, as shown in the yellow area. This is looking east on Montreal Road from the sidewalk adjacent to the thrift store. There's a 16-story high-rise building across from Gabriel's and a 17-story building further east down Montreal Road. This is from the subject site itself, looking south towards Montreal Road. The existing driveway is 6.1 meters wide on the subject site. This is looking west down Montreal Road from the sidewalk adjacent to the site's existing driveway. And on the left of the screen is a 12-story high-rise building. This is the portion of the site at 334 Montfort Street. The portion of the property from the property line on the left of the screen to the edge of the garage is about 7 meters. The proposal includes demolishing this garage and using 5 meters of this property for access, as shown roughly by the yellow arrow. This is looking south down St. Anne Avenue, part of the proposed development used for loading access. This is the proposed development before us today. Just to orient everyone, Montreal Road is located on the bottom left, St. Anne along the left and top, and the access to parking from Montfort is on the right of the screen. The proposed development is a residential care facility and shelter with a total gross floor area of 6,159 square meters. 801 square meters is for the shelter use, shown in yellow. The building's been designed in an H shape with 2 separate wings of 3 and 6 stories connected by a 2-story communal area. Each wing has separate pedestrian entrance. There are 3 separate vehicular accesses that are shown in the yellow arrows. The main pedestrian access is from Montreal Road. It permits vehicular access as well, and it includes a limited amount of surface parking. The entrance for employee parking is from Montfort, and the loading for both the proposed development and the thrift store is from St. Anne. The loading area flares out where it's closest to the rear yard of the adjacent triplex, which has surface parking in the rear. There's a total of 27 parking spaces proposed for the employee parking area in the rear. 15 parking spaces are located at the front of the property and 4 off St. Anne. There's a series of outdoor amenity areas proposed in the front, rear, and southeast areas. The closest part of the rear sunken terrace at the rear is about 17 meters or 56 feet from the closest residential lot line. The built form itself is set back between 4.5 and 8.8 meters from adjacent property lines on St. Anne and Granville, with additional step backs for the 6-story portion above the 2nd story. From the rear property line of homes on Montfort, the 3-story portion, at its closest, is 9.8 meters, and the 6-story building is between 15 and 20 meters from the property lines along Montfort. The landscape plan also includes 27 new trees, which are proposed largely around the perimeter of the site.
On peut voir ici le projet en question.
We can see here the project, Montreal Road at the bottom, St. Anne on the left, and Montfort on the right. This is a shelter, and it would be also used and it's 801 square meters. It's an H shape. It has two wings. There's a common area, and each wing has a separate entrance. The access, principal access is from Montreal Road, and access for employees is on Montfort Street, and the loading spaces will be on Saint-Anne Street at the back where there is parking. There will be 7 parking spaces, 15 in front and 4 on Saint-Anne. Our other areas are proposed for the front and on the southeast. The area the closest to the back of the property is at 18 meters. The setback is 15 square meters. The six-story building is at 15 meters, and landscaping includes 27 new trees, which will be around the perimeter.
In our official plan, I'll now speak about policy context on the site. So in our official plan, this site is designated as a traditional main street. The traditional main street designation speaks to a broad range of uses permitted. It includes things like retail and service commercial uses, offices, residential, and institutional uses. It also speaks to active frontages and compact pedestrian-friendly development. This is one of our target areas for intensification in our official plan. There's a generally permitted uses section in our official plan that states that where the zoning bylaw permits a dwelling in areas designated general urban area, developing community, central area, mixed-use center, and village, the bylaw will also permit shelter accommodation. Shelter accommodation shall be designed in a manner compatible with the general area. The zoning bylaw may include provisions to regulate the size and location of this use. This section in our official plan is prefaced by certain land uses are considered to be characteristic and supportive of the daily life and functioning of the community. For convenience, these uses have been grouped as generally permitted uses. These uses will be permitted within all land use designations, subject to the policies set out below in another applicable sections of this plan. There is not direction specifically to prohibit this use in our official plan. Its exclusion did cause discussion, and the conclusion was that in order to provide absolute clarity and transparency about the site-specific application, an amendment to the official plan has been included.
Donc, l'emplacement visé est désigné.
So here we have traditional Main Street. It's the official designation. Many uses are allowed within this designation, used for retail spaces, offices, and residential uses, institutional uses as well. We encourage street fronts and multiple uses for street traffic, foot traffic. This allows intensification. 3.1.4 of the official plan, called generally accepted use, stipulates that when the municipal zoning bylaw allows for this multi-purpose facility use in a traditional main street, it can include a shelter. The shelter has to be built to be compatible with the area in general. The zoning bylaw can include specifications for the place and use. Designations with regards to daily life and functioning of the community are allowed in all designation that are subject to all policy applicable to the official plan. We note that this policy does not contain anything banning a shelter, and because there is a lot of interest with regards to the shelter, a modification of the official plan is being suggested to allow permission for this site.
This is our land map for the official plan amendment before us today. The amendment is to permit shelter located in the specific area outlined, specific for our official plan amendment. We're recommending this because this is a mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented development within a traditional Main Street designation in our official plan, which permits a broad range of uses. There are community-serving uses on the site. A strong pedestrian entrance is included to activate the site, and the built form has been designed to be compatible with the surrounding low-rise community. It fits with the broad range of uses permitted, and a shelter is compatible with the remainder of the complex. The criteria found in 4.11 and 2.5.1 of our official plan have been reviewed. The scale and massing of the building, transition, and use are all part of the zoning and official plan amendments. Issues associated with noise, light, parking, and access, microclimatic conditions, and architectural elements are also part of our review, but more applicable to site plan control process. In the Montreal Road District Secondary Plan, this site is designated as part of the central sector. There are policies in the Montreal Road District Secondary Plan that speak to development including building, site design, and streetscaping elements which acknowledge the history of the French Quarter. Adequate setbacks and transition to adjacent low-rise uses are also stated. The Montreal Road District Secondary Plan does not permit surface parking lots in this area. We have recommended an amendment regarding surface parking. It's because the majority of the parking is located at the rear of the property. Where the parking has been located in the front, it's been limited to 13 meters back from the front property line and buffered by a potential landscaped area. There may be potential for this area near the entrance, as well as design components to accommodate elements which acknowledge the history of the French Quarter. And this will require further discussion with the applicant and potentially community as part of this site plan control process.
L'emplacement visé est désigné.
This site, center sector, in the secondary district plan for Montreal Road, which was the French Quarter. This 1.5.1.1 policy deals with buildings, architectural aspects, and the setbacks allowing low density. 1.1.2 of the district plan of Montreal Road does not allow any surface parking. The zoning regulation allows a surface parking only if it's 13 meters from the property line. The parking can be hidden behind Following a discussion with the community, this might be changed. This will happen during the approval of the implementation plan.
With regard to the zoning bylaw, the subject properties are zoned Traditional Main Street Subzone 3 with a height limit of 42 meters and Residential 4th Density Subzone E. The main portion of the property is zoned Traditional Main Street, and the properties on St. Anne and Montfort are designated Residential 4th Density. For the Traditional Main Street zone, the purpose is to include a broad range of uses, including residential and institutional uses, and that street continuity, scale, and character is maintained, the uses are compatible, and that they complement the surrounding area. With respect to uses, the permitted for this uses for this zone right now include residential care facility, community center, community health and resource center, emergency services, instructional facility, medical facility, place of worship, a hotel, a funeral home, recording studio, and residential dwelling units and rooming units if they're in a building with non-residential uses.
Donc l'emplacement visé.
This is zoned mostly Traditional Main Street under Zone 3 on St. Anne and Montfort Street, 4th Density Residential. The objectives are to allow a wide range of uses for institutional residential and to ensure continuity and to preserve the character of the street as well as ensure compatibility of use with neighboring uses. Traditional Main Street allows for many uses: community centers, health and resource centers, emergency services, residential units, as well as maximum heights of 42 meters.
For the zoning details of the zone, the highlighted cells on the screens are what is being recommended for an amendment. I'd like to point out that the height is less than what's permitted in this existing zone, and the setbacks are all increased from the minimum required in the zoning bylaw. For the change to the maximum front yard setback, we've deemed this acceptable because it's a limited amount of frontage and it's appropriate to set back greater than 2 meters so pedestrian activity does not impede the right-of-way. Our official plan speaks to locating front building facades parallel to the street, but it also allows for consideration to allow for interruptions where things like plazas or open space are located to provide a supportive function to that street activity. The official plan also speaks to the situations where development does not occupy the entire frontage of the site, that this site should be planned in a coordinated fashion with measures to relieve the visual impact of surface parking, which we feel has been accomplished through setting back that parking 13 meters from the front lot line. For the parking reduction that's being proposed for amendment, the current booth center facility has less parking than what's proposed here. There will be a maximum number of staff on site at any one time. The area along Montreal Road is a transit priority corridor with improvements for cycling expected as part of future road reconstruction. And the city is generally looking in our official plan for opportunities to support less parking than more. This is the zoning key plan, which forms part of our recommendation. In Area A, we're proposing to rezone to permit the shelter use. Area B, we're recommending a rezoning to consolidate with Areas A, but for that area, we've retained the height limit of 11 meters to be consistent with the adjacent residential properties. For Area C, which is the access off Mont 4, we're retaining the existing residential zoning, but recommending an exception to allow for access to the site. With Area D, which is the existing Salvation Army thrift store, we're recommending a rezoning to permit the loading zone, but not to permit a shelter use at that specific location. What is before us today, from a zoning perspective, is largely the shelter use, the parking reduction and location, and the change to the front yard setback. All the other provisions included in the zoning details are details of the proposed design. We are recommending this because this is a mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented development in a traditional Main Street designation which permits a broad range of uses. The complex fits with the broad range of uses permitted, and the shelter is compatible with the remainder. There are community-serving uses on site, a strong pedestrian entrance, and the built form has been designed to be compatible with the surrounding low-rise community. Criteria in our official plan have been reviewed. The scale and the massing, building transition and use are part of that zoning and official plan amendment review. Again, issues associated with things like noise, light, parking access, microclimatic conditions, and architectural elements were also part of our review, but more applicable to the site plan control process. The build form also includes setbacks and stepbacks from adjacent properties that exist along Montreal Road, which won't limit the built form potential for sites along Montreal Road to develop into the future. This slide shows the distribution of uses within the proposed facility. The portion of the shelter in the greater facility is shown at red at the rear of the 6-story portion, and again totals 801 square meters of the total 6,159 square meter complex. We've recommended in the zoning details a cap in the zoning of 900 square meters for the shelter use to provide a minimal amount of flexibility. I'd now like to speak a little bit to section 134 of our zoning bylaw, which is specific to shelter accommodations. In section 134, there's provision which limits the number of shelters in Ward 12 to 4. There are 4 shelters in Ward 12 currently that were recognized in the 2008 report where council approved recommendations. The intention of this project is to close the Salvation Army Booth Center and relocate to this site. If this subject proposal is approved, there will be 4 shelters in Ward 12. We've reviewed facilities that have been identified to us to determine what zoning definition is applicable. In all cases, the other sites are community health and resource centers, hotel, group homes, or residential care facilities under the zoning bylaw definition. These other facilities that have been identified, they did exist in 2008 when the cap was put in place, and they were not deemed to be shelters at that time. However, as we think this site is appropriate for a shelter, and to address the situation of any other facilities being identified as shelter, We have also recommended a zoning provision which permits this site as a shelter regardless of Section 134. In conclusion, Madam Chair and members of committee, this is a relocation of an existing facility from an area with a high concentration of shelters under our zoning bylaw to a site with compatible and permitted land uses within the same building. The built form has been designed to mitigate land use impacts and to allow space for Montreal Road to continue to develop as intended. We reviewed the applications for official plan and zoning amendments and concluded that they are appropriate for this site, and as such, we are recommending approval.
En conclusion,
To conclude, the Planning Committee recommends that this be approved because the proposal is moving an actual shelter in a place where there is a high concentration of shelters to a place where it will be combined with a multipurpose facility and complementary uses. The built form seeks to reduce the impact on other users and the neighboring area. This does not impede on the development of Montreal Road in the spirit of the designation as traditional Main Street. Planning Services concludes that this is appropriate for the site in question and recommends approval.
Over to our city solicitor, who has a number of slides regarding legal comments.
Madam Chair, I'm going to have Samantha Montroy take the committee through the legal part of this.
Madame la Présidente,
Legal Services provided a legal opinion on many issues with regards to this proposal before you today. You will find the text of this legal opinion appended as document 6. However, as asked, I would like to offer an overview of the main points of this legal opinion. First of all, there are no legal impediments to committee or council considering the recommendations in this report. The current City Council is not bound by the policy decisions or directions of a past council. The city's current official plan allows for the creation of shelters according to Section 3.1.4. There is no maximum shelter cap highlighted within the official plan. There are no prohibitions or restrictions on shelters in the Montreal Road District's secondary plan. There is no provision in the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw 2008-250 or the official plan that prohibits shelters on traditional or arterial main streets. The site-specific rezoning being requested addresses the relocation of an existing shelter and is not related to a new shelter. Therefore, there is no impact on the shelter cap established for Ward 12 in the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw 2008-250. The Planning Committee is responsible for overseeing all development and planning within the urban boundary in accordance with the city's official plan document, including zoning designations, community planning, site design requirements, and affordable housing. The Planning Committee is responsible for evaluating planning applications under the applicable planning policies, specifically the provincial policy statement, the official plan, and the zoning bylaw. The jurisdiction of this committee is limited to planning. As with all other considerations, the considerations that are not linked to the use, to land use, should not inform the decisions of the committee or of the council. If the recommendation is founded on the considerations that have nothing to do with land use, the decision of the council as based on this recommendation might be reversed by the Municipal Affairs Commission of Ontario if the decision is appealed. Is that all? Thank you. Thank you.
first three speakers up. No, we're not going to ask questions. We're going to go right to the, and we already have a determination on most of that. So that would be not in order right now.
I do think that it has influence with some of the delegations. So could I ask one or two questions?
No, I'm going to call the three people up, and not at this time.
I don't have questions on the presentation. I have questions to the legal.
You know, and I'm going to go to our city solicitor because he's already, I know, we've dealt with this at council. Mr. O'Connor?
Madam Chair, I think you've already made your ruling, and it would be appropriate to begin with the delegations at this time. If there were any questions, we'd certainly deal with them at the end of the day.
Just for the
Thank you.
Of the delegation, I understand the ruling specific to the presentation.
No, you're not using a mic and you're not in order anymore, so I'm going to go to the first three people and ask them to come forward, please. First one is Andrew Lumsden. You'll be the first speaker. Andrew, if you could take a seat. Ben Gianni, are you here, Ben? You're second. And Suzanne Lapine. Suzanne, are you here? Let's see. So take your seats. Vice Chair Tierney. We have a mic for the Vice Chair.
Great, thank you for that. I did want to take the opportunity while our delegations are getting seated to colleagues I work with on a regular basis, Nathalie Desrosiers, the MPP for Ottawa-Vanier, and Mona Fortier, the MP for Ottawa-Vanier, are in attendance today. So thank you for coming out.
Thank you. Andrew? So when you begin, we have 5 minutes, and as I said, I'm going to be really strict on the 5 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me to come and speak to you today. I'm understandably a little bit nervous, being the first one kicking off. And my son didn't help. He came to wish me good luck and then said, "Dad, please don't go off into any side stories." I'll try not to. So, during the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to meet several of the clients of the Booth Center, or Sally Ann Center, Sally Ann as they call it, on George Street in the market. I've in fact talked at some length to 7 of them. Most of them were pretty articulate and intelligent, and of course very well informed on the system. I tried to persuade them to sign up and come and speak to you today, but I didn't succeed. I got as far as coaxing one into accompanying me here today to help me out if there were any questions, but at the last minute he said he had to go off and get some drug treatment, so he's not here today. So I presume to talk on behalf of them and perhaps give you some inside information from their point of view. They're a nomadic group. This may surprise you or not. Contrary to some opinions expressed that most of them came from Vanier, this really isn't quite true at all. They come from all over the country. They seem to like Ottawa. Ottawa is apparently quite attractive, so hats off to the shelters. Among the admittedly small sample that I talked to, only one welcomed the move to a new facility because it would contain a smoking space. The rest would prefer to stay in the market. The Booth Center, it turns out, has not consulted with them at all regarding the move to Vanier. Many or most have no knowledge at all of the proposed move. The Booth Center doesn't even have a residence committee, which are quite common among shelters across the country. When I asked them what life was like, they said, well, it really is, it's not a shelter, it's more like a prison. And they should know. 2 of them have been in and out of penitentiaries. I too have been in many penitentiaries across the country, but not as an inmate, by the grace of God. But there are many likenesses, as you might imagine. And in fact, in some ways, the Booth Center is even more severe in its treatment of its inmates or residents than regular penitentiaries. For example, they administer random urine tests, and if they don't pass, they literally get thrown out in the street without, and this is their story anyway, even if it might be minus 30 degrees, they're out on their ear on the street. And my final point is to bring to your attention, if you're not aware of it, how they financially get by. The majority receive an allowance from the city's social assistance program or ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program. Others are on workman's compensation or some form of disability insurance. They get room and board free. So what do they spend their money on?
Thank you, sir. That your 5 minutes is up. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions related to planning issues that Mr. Lumsden has brought up? Well, thank you very much, sir. While you are leaving your seat, I'm going to ask Louise Levesque to come and take your seat. And so we'll go right now to Benjamin Gianni. Ben, as you know, you have 5 minutes.
Hi, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Benjamin Gianni. I'm a professor and former director of the School of Architecture at Carleton University, where I now coordinate the urbanism program. In the course of the work that I do at the university, I work regularly with city planning staff, with ward councillors, community representatives, architects, professional planners, and many of Ottawa's key developers. City building is my business, and I know the lay of the land. Vanier is also my turf. I've lived in the community for close to 2 decades. Each morning I wait for the bus on the corner of Montreal Road and Marier. The issue before the Planning Committee is whether a site-specific exception should be made to permit a shelter at 333 Montreal Road. Both the location and the scale of the facility have been a matter of great debate, as has the organization's service delivery model. I'm here to argue in favor of the official plan, namely that the facility proposed by the Salvation Army does not belong on Montreal Road or on any of Ottawa's traditional main streets. According to the official plan, shelters are permitted anywhere in the general area that residential uses are permitted, notwithstanding whatever other zoning provisions might apply. And although they crisscross the general urban area, the official plan treats traditional main streets differently based on the unique and important role they play in the communities that have formed around them. Uses on these streets are intended to support what the OP calls, quote, an essential community focus, unquote, and must, quote, minimize disruption in existing stable neighborhoods, unquote. The Vanier community has argued that the Salvation Army's proposed facility will do neither. Indeed, there's broad consensus that the facility will further disrupt and erode the stability of a struggling neighborhood. I want to emphasize that to not permit a shelter on a traditional main street can in no way be considered a hardship. the land abutting main streets constitutes an infinitesimally small percentage of the land available in the general urban area. By proposing a shelter at 333 Montreal Road, the Salvation Army is, in effect, implying that there are no sites in the general urban area that are suitable for shelters. I strongly contest this. The Salvation Army has not demonstrated that suitable sites do not exist elsewhere, and due diligence has not been done. By requesting an exception, the Salvation Army is, in effect, claiming that their proposed site at 333 Montreal Road is exceptional, or in other words, is an exceptionally good site for a facility of this kind. Again, I would argue that the Salvation Army has in no way demonstrated this. And this raises what I consider to be the most important issue, namely the very limited scope of the Salvation Army's site selection criteria, which makes no mention of neighborhood impact. Not to consider how a facility of this scale and this nature might affect the host community is beyond irresponsible. It's downright negligent. This quote-unquote oversight is especially egregious considering the core values of the Salvation Army. They should be held accountable. Given the inevitable impact on the community and the significant amount of municipal funds that will underpin the operation of the proposed facility, I would argue that both the city and the Salvation Army should be held to a higher standard. Both the Planning Committee and the Council as a whole must consider the full range of issues and implications involved. These include the impact of the proposed size and service delivery model of the facility on the surrounding community. And fortunately, there's strong evidence to suggest that the Ontario Municipal Board would agree with this assessment. Vanier is, without question, a supportive community. To brush off its concerns as NIMBYism would be disingenuous, to say the least.
It's 1 minute.
But while the community supports the Salvation Army's move to a more suitable facility, there is no evidence to support that 333 Montreal Road is the best of all possible alternative sites. Accordingly, we respectfully submit that a site-specific exception not be made for 333 Montreal Road.
Okay, so we are on our second speaker, and already you broke the rules. Remember that one about no heckling, no clapping, no applause, no booing? Okay. We're on number 2, but we do have questions. Councillor Fleury, followed by Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merci, Ben. Merci de ton beau travail, puis merci ta...
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for your good work. Thank you for your thoughts.
You kind of briefly touched on the OMB situation. Could you elaborate on what similar files have gone to the OMB and what the OMB has specifically said on them?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fleury.
Hang on a second. Mr. O'Connor, is that before us?
Madam Chair, as I don't know what the cases that either the councillor or the delegate may be speaking of, it's difficult to provide you with any advice. Yeah. We don't normally take legal advice at this point, but I leave it in your hands.
And I don't recall Mr. Janney saying that he was a lawyer either, but I'll let you ask the question.
Okay.
I did ask my question.
Yeah, this is a case that came before the OMB in 2004. A shelter provider was turned down and appealed the issue to the OMB. The OMB was very clear in that decision that indeed it went beyond strict planning issues and really considered the impact of the use and the scale of the use on the community. Ultimately, the OMB upheld the City of Toronto's decision to turn down the shelter use.
And you've done a lot of work. The committee you were working with did a review of the exact site selection criteria as identified by the Salvation Army. You've identified 32 sites, which you spoke to demonstrated that they didn't do their research. Could you talk about some of those sites and what was, we're not trying to push this issue into another community, and that was clear. But it was a demonstration that they didn't do their homework, and maybe you can elaborate on that.
I think that one claim...
on that, I'm not going to allow that kind of discussion, okay? I mean, we're talking, he's not the person making the application, we do have an application before us. It's not an application that says, hey, find out if you can find me another spot that's better. So that question, I think, is out of line. Do you have anything else for him?
Well, I don't think it is in the sense that
But that's great that you're arguing with me, but that's not the way we roll at these things, and you know that.
Well, I don't think it's fair that the work was done by members of the community to identify other locations.
We have the submission, but again, the application is not, we think this is a good spot. That's not what's before us. This is the application we have before us, not whether a lot of people in the community think that there's a number of other locations.
Well, respectfully, Madam Chair, members of Planning Committee have asked me to identify solutions. And
we have a presentation from Mr. Janney, and they can read it there. Point of order? Councillor Hubley, point of order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You made your ruling. We have a lot of delegations here. I think we should be moving on.
Thank you. Do you have any other question of Mr. Janney? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Janney. So hang on, Mr. Janney. I forgot we have Councillor Leeper has questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Janney, you've noted that they don't belong on traditional main streets. The Salvation Army has not taken into account neighborhood impact. Can I just ask you, what do you feel that neighborhood impact is going to be? I think that's going to be critical for those of us who may be uncomfortable with the notion of putting one of these on a traditional main street.
I don't offer my own opinions. I look to the official plan, and I look at what the terms of reference for traditional main streets are set by the official plan. I quoted a few of them, which would be essential community focus and uses which minimize disruption in existing stable neighborhoods. And I would argue that it would be very hard to argue that this is a community-focused use unless you have a very limited idea of what the Vanier community is, or that indeed it would provide minimum disruption. I think the community has been arguing all along that in fact the level of disruption would be quite severe. And then I would also refer to the official plan, which talks about established neighborhoods and the impact of these facilities on established neighborhoods. I believe that there are sites in Ottawa around which a community could develop around a facility like this, which are not established neighborhoods. Lots of areas in the TOD, areas designated for TOD development, for instance, would be excellent sites for consideration for a shelter of this kind. These would be emerging communities that would develop around a use like this rather than dropping a use into a mature neighborhood.
You're again going at the same answer of the previous question. Again, that's not what's before us, is do you know of different sites that are available for this application? This application is the address that it is.
I thought I was answering his question. I'm sorry.
Anything else?
I'm still waiting to hear.
Councillor
I'm
Leeper?
still waiting to hear, Chair. What are the impacts that you feel that this would have?
Yeah, there will be lots of people to speak to this issue. I'm by no means the expert. But the Salvation Army has very strict rules about who can and can't spend time in the facility during the day. And therefore, there's very strong reason to believe that many of the users and clients of the facility will be out on the streets during the day. And that, for instance, would have a negative impact on businesses in the community.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor Cloutier?
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Can you, on this specific site, can you refresh our memory as to the site selection criteria that the Salvation Army did use and how this specific site is appropriate or not appropriate?
Yeah, unfortunately I didn't bring them and I don't have them in front of me. It had to do with being in close proximity to services. It had to do with being within a 30-minute radius of the existing booth center. It had to do with having access to transport, and there were a few others. It had to do with being 1.8 acres. When we looked at, before I could come here and make a claim that no case has been made that this is an exceptional site, I had to look to determine whether there were other sites around, and there were. There were plenty that filled that criteria. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
Are there any items with relation to this specific site that makes this specific site, to use your word, exceptional and the only site appropriate for its use? For its
absolutely
use?
not. none whatsoever.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I'd ask when Ben leaves his seat, Amanda Carver, please come forward. And now Suzanne Lepine, thank you for coming out today. You have a presentation?
Bonjour, Madame.
Good day, Madam Chair.
A grandmother and a nurse. And when the Salvation Army announced the proposed plan, I took some time this summer to bike around the neighborhood and talk to our community. These are the women, families, and children as well. Since the Salvation Army planned to build a very large institution for high-risk men and also their friends on our main street, the community has voiced many concerns. The women and families are very scared, and the sex workers on Montreal Road are absolutely petrified. Both the City of Ottawa and the Salvation Army have failed to recognize, respond to the negative impact the development will have on a vulnerable community. The city has a responsibility to conduct a comprehensive social impact assessment to address both the social and security. Vanier is a poor community and is coping with significant social and health and security and economic issues. Half the population of Vanier are women. A fifth of Vanier households make less than $20,000 per year. 30% of those families are single parents. Lone female parents family in Vanier are 21% compared to 12% for the rest of Ottawa. 50% of the children who are in kindergarten are vastly disadvantaged and are not school ready. 66% of families with children in Vanier live in small apartments. They have no place to play. The children play in the alleys. They play in the street, and they play in front of their home or on the sidewalk. We have a very high rate of teenage pregnancy, 10% versus 2% in Ottawa. We have 4 elementary schools within less than a kilometer of the proposed site. The Salvation Army has invested in a high-secured institution providing safety and privacy for their clients and their employees, thus recognizing high-risk, dangerous environment. Yet neither the Salvation Army or the city takes responsibility when the clients are outside their the boundaries, the property boundaries. Residents will be consuming outside alcohol and drugs. They're not allowed to consume on the sites. There's no arm reduction program. The Salvation Army on Boot Street has consistently been the top 5 location requiring police intervention. There's been 2 police audits in October 2016 that demonstrated the prevalence of criminal activity and disorderly public behavior within that site. Many illegal activities identified within the vicinity are perpetrated by resident and non-resident. That's a big factor. There's also a lot of non-resident coming to the facility. Will there be more intoxicated men and vagrancy in our park? Will there be more broken bottles, needles where children play? What about the fentanyl crisis? Will there be bigger, larger loitering of individuals in our street? Will there be more sexual harassment, exploitation of women and teens on Montreal Road? We are deeply concerned about the negative and the security impact. Unsafe neighborhood, children don't play outside and they don't take part in activity at school. Children will be sedentary, watch television, become overweight. The scope and scale of the proposed Salvation Army will make it unmanageable for integrated into the community without compromising the fragility, social cohesion, and security and sustainability of the community. The community has worked hard in recent years to improve the cultural, social, and economic landscape. The city has invested in positive programs like the Vanier Social Pediatric Hub. A sense of hope has attracted young family. There is more empowerment and engagement in our community. The implementation of the proposed would have a powerful and destructive impact for Vanier for generations to come. Please ensure the city conducts a social impact assessment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No? Thank you for coming out today. Randall Bartlett, would you... Amanda Carver is here, right? Yes. So then I'm just calling Randall to the seat because thank you for your presentation. Okay, Louise Lebec, and followed by Amanda Carver, followed by Randall Bartlett.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the City Council.
I was born. I was a social worker that worked with high-risk seniors, and also I'm the lead of the social impact on the community. How are seniors going to be affected? What is going to be their impact? Senior citizens represent a substantive demographic in Vanier. Seniors represent 27.5% of Vanier residents. High proportion of them, there's a higher proportion of seniors in Vanier than in other sectors of the city. 85% of seniors live alone compared to 26% citywide. 16.7% of seniors are of low income compared to 6.1% citywide. This sensitive group was not consulted or taken into consideration in the city's recommendation to the Planning Committee. However, they will be greatly affected by the planning's decision. Seniors are especially susceptible to aggressive nature of the Salvation Army's clients as demonstrated at the current Salvation Army location. Due to the lack of consultation and social impact assessment, seniors will be placed at greater risk of crime and violence. The proposal is already creating fears amongst seniors. Okay? If the proposal is allowed to move forward, it is expected to create a greater fear and intimidation of seniors, especially at-risk senior women and those shopping and walking on Montreal Road. The use of the land will affect their physical, psychological, spiritual, financial well-being, and their quality of life in Vanier. L'impact sur la communauté francophone.
The impact on the French community. The Salvation Army, Marc Provost, who is their director, said that 40% of employees are bilingual only. And there's going to be around 40% of services that are going to be bilingual, and this in a French community. The linguistic rights will also, again, be tampered with. We've known, according to the Charter in Bill 140,
Fully supporting this project would discriminate against the francophone minority community. In conclusion, les sans-abri ont besoin d'un logement.
People without a house need a long-term health, long-term...
About end up with a downtown east side image. Ça compromettra la fragilité.
That's going to reduce the viability of the region.
If it's outside our fence, it's not our problem. Destructive long-term spillover impact for generations to come. Les droits linguistiques minoritaires une fois.
Minority linguistic rights will be trampled on.
Old school. Branching out in various communities and housing first is new school. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Madame Levesque. Okay, thank you. Amanda Carver is up next, and I'd ask Tim Aubry to come and take Ms. Levesque's seat. Go ahead, Amanda.
Does not meet the objectives of the policy statement and the city plan as they pertain to traditional main streets and building healthy, sustainable communities. Main streets are integral for driving the local economy and creating a healthy, vibrant community around it. Downtowns create a critical mass of activities where commercial, cultural, and civic activities are concentrated, facilitating business, learning, and cultural exchange. The main street is the heart of a neighborhood. A healthy heart is a healthy community. And this is critical because dealing with homelessness begins with prevention. I'm lucky to speak to you because I wasn't supposed to make it. I grew up with a teenage mother who dropped out of high school and a disabled father who couldn't give us child support. Kids like me usually become one of these statistics. Growing up in poverty impacts your health, mental and physical, for adults and kids. Unlike most kids from my neighborhood, I got out. My mother had the foresight to put me in a French immersion program outside my catchment area. The result was I had role models from outside my socioeconomic group. In my neighborhood, I watched adults struggling to balance parenting with addictions, child abuse, and many other antisocial activities. At school, I met peers who gave me a sense for what family life could be, normalized routines, and peers who valued education. Later, my city created its first mixed income development, and we moved in. It was a place where all kids played together, and playground politics never divided us by our parents' income. No one was shamed. This is what Ottawa as a whole can look like if we build a city to stop geographically separating people based on their incomes. These things helped me break out of multi-generational poverty. I use this chance to focus my master's on how we change interventions and create better outcomes for low-income youth. I worked 6 years with abused and traumatized children's aid wards in residential treatment, a population who as adults comprise 40% of people experiencing homelessness. So I speak to you from personal, educational, and professional experience. If Montreal Road develops a diversity of restaurants, shops, and cultural venues, Vanier blossoms into a community where all people see themselves living, not only poor ones. If we diversify the economic landscape, we build a market-driven approach to mitigating the ill effects of poverty and interrupts its cycle in the next generation. Hindenburg is a great example of neighborhood growth driven by a main street. Evidence shows to pull a child out of poverty, sometimes all you need is one healthy, positive role model. Encourage development so all people, income levels irrespective, see themselves belonging, and you create that mixed income community. And provide a natural intervention for poverty that costs the city nothing and saves it for paying for future services. Evidence also proves moving shelters out of distressed neighborhoods is better for shelter users. The applicant and city staff had said the development will not interfere with Montreal development because the emergency shelter is a small percent of the land's use. However, 140 of 350 beds is actually about 40% of the development. Secondly, classifying the non-emergency shelter beds as a residential care facility is erroneous. This is not a population who requires residential care, and evidence show they do better when they live on their own. This development is actually a 350-bed shelter. It's erroneous by the author to state that the development will minimally impact the main street. The applicant claims that the property lines allow for regular development. Realistically, concentrating social services inhibits growth. These are two main streets, 2 kilometers apart, bordering the same community. One has no social services. The other has 15, including 4 addiction treatment or methadone clinics. Adding another giant service to the community stigmatizes the community from commercial investment. I personally canceled my plan to move my business into the area after the announcement was made, worrying that the stigma would affect client choice to take my services. Ironically, modern urban planning arose to address inequalities and poverty. We've escaped these roots somehow, focusing solely on built forms. If you in the slightest doubt the supposition that property design will protect the economic development from the effects of concentrating social services, respect the city plan's admission of shelters as permitted uses on traditional main streets and vote against this. Help us prevent homelessness and help us help people escape homelessness faster.
1 minute.
If council proceeds to place the shelter on the main street, it raises a consideration the issue could be challenged at OMB, as it will interfere with the creation of a breadth of economic activities and limits the development of a healthy, sustainable community. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you for your presentation. So I have no speakers. Katie Oppen, or Open. If you would come and take Ms. Levesque's seat, and Ms. Carver's seat, and we'll go to Randall Bartlett, followed by Tim Aubry, and then Katie Oppen. Mr. Bartlett.
Planning Committee Chair, Vice Chair, members, and councillors. I am here today to speak about the fact that Montreal Road will not develop in a manner that meets the intention of the traditional Main Street designation if you choose to approve the Salvation Army's application for 333 Montreal Road. This contradicts the unfounded assertion made in the Planning Department recommendations and the deeply flawed economic benefits study produced at the Salvation Army's request. I believe the evidence shows that this development will stunt, if not reverse, the revitalization of Montreal Road and Vanier more broadly. Common sense tells you that when a large and concentrated institutional use is added to a traditional main street that has a pre-existing high concentration of social services, this leads to economic decline as opposed to development. In regard to shelters specifically, their concentration leads to a concentration of illegal behaviors, particularly drug use and trafficking. To quote the 2008 Interim Control Bylaw study, quote, "These acts result in negative impacts, worsening the health and safety of both the homeless and at risk, as well as increased safety concerns amongst the residents, particularly in communal areas such as streets, sidewalks, stores, parks, and schools," unquote. Indeed, this was part of the rationale laid out in the 2008 Interim Bylaw Control Study, which ultimately led to the cap on the number of shelters in Ward 12 and a restriction on the distance between shelters to 500 meters. Importantly, these are among the restrictions that the applicant and planning staff are looking for you to amend. City of Ottawa planning staff will assert that these community impacts are beyond the scope of planning process. However, on appeal to the City of Toronto Municipal Shelter Bylaw, the Ontario Municipal Board ruled in 2004 that, quote, "The board makes a determination as to whether the neighborhood is an appropriate one for the type of use, and whether the use is one which will either not adversely impact the neighborhood or only do so to a minimal extent. Therefore, the impact of this land use development must be taken into consideration in the approval process for this application," unquote. As such, City of Ottawa planning staff should have taken the community impacts of this application into account when developing their recommendation. The economic and social impacts on the community are particularly relevant to Vanier. In a 2008 report submitted to the Community and Protective Services Committee entitled Criteria for Fair Distribution and Distribution of Social Housing and Services, then Ward 12 Councillor George Bédard writes, quote, "Studies also show that adding homelessness service locations has negative effects that are particularly severe in distressed neighborhoods, those with low income or high density. Adding a single service location in a distressed neighborhood has substantial negative impact 600 meters away, while in better off neighborhoods the impact is neutral or positive if 6 or fewer sites are present within 150 meters. The social consequences of poverty are not linear. That is to say, the impact of adding poor or homeless people in an area depends on the concentration of those who are already in the area," unquote. I think it goes without saying that Vanier is a distressed neighborhood with among the highest concentrations of social services and crime of any neighborhood in the City of Ottawa. According to the Ottawa Neighborhood Study, 30% of Vanier children live in poverty, roughly double the Ottawa average. Meanwhile, nearly 1 in 4 Vanier children scores in the lowest 10% for school readiness, related to cognitive and language development, almost 4 times the Ottawa average. For these reasons and many more, Vanier could reasonably be considered a distressed neighborhood, and as such, adding homelessness service locations in Vanier could be expected to have disproportionately negative impacts on this already struggling community. In contrast, downtowns redevelop through what are known as smart growth principles. Accordingly, downtown revitalization begins with community consultations, for example, the Montreal Road District Secondary Plan. The main street should allow for a mix of retail uses that creates an identity that makes people want to live there and visit. It should have an attractive and walkable streetscape that must not only be safe but must also feel safe. It needs to be tidy and free of crime and associated dangers. A well-designed main street also has a diversity of economic uses in addition to traditional retail and commercial spaces. Having been endorsed by the Barrhaven BIA, smart growth principles are not a foreign concept to the City of Ottawa, but are instead critical to its continued economic development. However, the proposed Salvation Army facility at 333 Montreal Road reflects none of these principles and best practices. Instead of supporting a diversity of economic uses, it will lead to a further concentration of an institutional use that is associated with drug trafficking and consumption, as well as other illicit activities, as was pointed out in the aforementioned 2008 reports. With that, I would like to thank you for your time, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, and we do have a question from Councillor Fleury.
Madame la Présidente. Randall, I have a few questions relating to the current, you're an economist, you live in the neighborhood. What do you see in terms of the economic development along Montreal Road and more specifically the land uses that are permitted for its development and to allow it to thrive?
Well, I think the reason was made very, very clear in the 2008 interim control bylaw, that the rationale for restricting the use of shelters and the cap on the number in Ward 12 and the distance between them was because of the activities that were created, the concerns that came from the community, as well as economic impacts. So I think it goes without saying that the impact is going to be adverse. It's going to be a negative impact on the community, given the large and concentrated institutional use and the activities that are associated with that large institutional use that are very well documented in 2008.
And as a resident, do you feel that the types of businesses and services that are available along Montreal Road suffice your needs as a young adult, parent,
No, not at all. In fact, as they currently exist, we've seen a very slow development in the commercial businesses along Montreal Road. And over time, since we moved there about 5.5 years ago, we've seen an improvement in the mix of business offerings that are there, the quality of business offerings that are there. And that's certainly something that attracted us to actually move back from Toronto to return to Vanier, where we still owned our home, because the neighborhood continued to improve, has excellent schools, and has a very good community feel and a sense of optimism about the future for that economic development.
Thank you.
Conseiller Cloutier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Thank you very much for the presentation. In light of some of your comments, the staff report, specifically page 18, the Future Montreal Road, says the subject development will not preclude the ability of Montreal Road to develop as a traditional main street. Do you agree with that, or?
No, I don't agree with that. No, I believe that because of the large concentrated institutional use and the activities that are associated with that specific institutional use, it will preclude business and residential investment in the area, and as a result, it will lead to a reversal in what we've seen in terms of economic development on Montreal Road.
Just as a follow-up, can staff comment on?
No, staff are not commenting. Remember that we have questions for them at the end of the day.
Thank you.
And I'd also remind you, Councillor Cloutier, that the activities or characteristics of the potential users is not before us today.
Yeah, but I'm referring specifically to a line in the staff report.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay, next up is Tim Aubrey to speak, and to take Mr. Bartlett's chair is Gord Diamond. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Mr. Aubrey?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Vice Chair, City Councillors, thank you for this opportunity to present before you today on the proposed construction of a multi-purpose facility on Montreal Road that includes a residential care facility and a shelter. My name's Tim Aubrey. I'm a professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Ottawa. I'm also, I should say, a resident of Orleans and proud of it. I'm opposing the recommendation of the Planning Committee to allow the building of the multi-purpose facility in Vanier as it is detailed in the report prepared by city staff. Now, is it possible to get my slides up? Sorry.
Just hold, sir, till we have that completed, because I'm not going to dock your time when you don't have your presentation.
Thank you. I'm sorry? 7?
I will.
Oh.
So you know what? I'm going to go, while you get set up, I'm going, you have it? Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So now we'll start with the 5 minutes again.
Oh, thank you. So my reason for opposing the proposal is I don't believe that the proposed multi-purpose building includes a residential care facility as defined by the City of Ottawa. Specifically, a residential care facility is defined as an establishment providing supervised or supportive in-house care for those needing assistance with daily living. In the case of the proposed multi-purpose building, there are 210 long-term beds planned for men receiving residential care. Based on the research I'm going to tell you very briefly about, I do not believe that the majority of men who will be staying in the residential facility need assistance with daily living. In other words, I believe that with access to housing, the right kind of support, these individuals can rapidly move into permanent housing. Now, up until very recently, our social service systems delivered services to people with chronic histories of homelessness in a series of treatment steps that would eventually lead them to becoming permanently housed. But people had to be judged as being ready for independent living by demonstrating treatment compliance, psychiatric stability, and abstinence. In the past several years, there's been a radical shift in how services are delivered to people who have a history of chronic homelessness. Instead of providing them with residential treatment, often delivered in shelters as a step along the way to becoming housed, we've collapsed the staircase, moving people as quickly as possible out of homelessness into permanent housing without preconditions. This new approach is known as Housing First. In simple terms, Housing First is a combination of subsidized housing with intensive support. The housing scattered throughout the city and can either be in private market rental housing or in social housing. In 2008, the Mental Health Commission of Canada sponsored a large multi-site study known as the At-Home Chez Soi Demonstration Project on the effectiveness of using a Housing First approach with people who were chronically homeless. I served as a member of the national research team and was the co-lead researcher at the Moncton site. We followed about 2,000 participants. Half were receiving Housing First. The other half were receiving treatment as usual, including, in some cases, residential care. Now, if you look at, it'll be hard for people to see in the seats, but the top line, the red line, is the Housing First. It's percentage of time in permanent housing. The blue line, which is the bottom line in the different cities, is people receiving treatment as usual. Again, percentage of time in permanent housing. You can see that Housing First is clearly superior to treatment as usual in ending homelessness. It also shows with the spike, the early spike, that people are housed very rapidly. It demonstrates that the majority of individuals, and in this case it was 80+% of people, are able to end homelessness by participation in these programs. This is why I would argue that the beds dedicated to residential care in the proposed multipurpose building actually entail more shelter beds. As a result, it contravenes the zoning bylaw, limiting the gross floor area for shelter use as stated on page 13 and page 70 of the planning document. Because of the findings of the At-Home Chez Soi study, programs and policies across the country have moved in the direction of scaling up Housing First programs.
1 minute.
Thank you. It includes the Federal Homelessness Partnering Strategy, revised, so the majority of its funding is allocated now to Housing First programs. The province of Ontario recently released a document called the Ontario Supportive Housing Policy Framework. It states that housing for special needs populations should be guided by Housing First principles. A key aspect of the City of Ottawa's current 10-year plan is implementing the Housing First model with targeted outcomes, including the elimination of homelessness and getting shelter stays down to less than 30 days. The fact individuals do not require residential care to exit homelessness, combined with the very high likelihood that funding for these types of services going forward will not be available, calls into question the defining of these longer-term beds as being part of a residential care facility. For this reason, I believe that the proposed building should not be approved by the Planning Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We do have questions for you. Councillor Leeper, followed by Councillor Fleury, and then Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. One of the challenges that those of us who happen to agree with the thrust of your presentation have in voting on this proposal is that it's been made very clear to us that we are dealing with a planning issue, zoning, land use, and it is going to be difficult for a number of us to find that Planning Act angle on the kind of argument that you've just made. And it may be unfair to put you on the spot, but I think it's critical to ask this question now so that those speakers who may be following you give this some really serious consideration. But how do you feel the argument that you've made interacts with the considerations of the Planning Act?
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that the users of the new facility in the residential care portion of it do not need those services to move into permanent housing. As a result, I would argue that they're actually staying in a shelter and not a residential care facility.
How would you How would you amend this particular proposal to de-emphasize what you've asserted is the argument you're making that there is an inappropriately large amount of this space devoted to shelter, that the residential shelter is in fact shelter? I'm just trying to find a way to turn this into Planning Act language so that those of us who feel that it's an inappropriate use here can make a decision that is defensible before the board.
I just believe most of the residential care facility is not needed. It just doesn't align with what we know people are able to do when they end up in an emergency shelter. So that from my standpoint, I would actually get rid of the residential care facility, most of it. I appreciate there's some beds for respite care, and that's another issue. However, the other parts, daily skill living training, addictions treatment, there's beds being reserved for working men. I would just hive those off because I would argue they're just not necessary. And instead, provide the emergency shelter beds and grow the housing first model in the shelter, which the Salvation Army is already doing and doing well.
And I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the reply. It's a question that I'll be asking from time to time, and for those who may be listening who are going to be presenting over the next couple of days, I hope it's something that they'll provide some serious thought to. When we are dealing, for example, with a mixed-use building on a traditional main street in Kitchissippi Ward, and the thought is to provide retail space on the ground floor, we don't look under the Planning Act at does Ottawa need or does Westboro need another coffee shop. It's not a Planning Act consideration. No. And so I hope over the course of the next couple of days that we're going to be able to knit the argument that you've been making together with Planning Act considerations.
But in this case, in the document, it clearly states that the area of the shelter has been amended, I think by about 100 square feet, from 800 to 901 possibly.
Okay. Yep.
And what I'm saying is actually what you have in large part is an emergency shelter of over 6,000 square feet. That's the point I'm making.
That's compelling. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Maybe compelling, but, you know, that's an opinion. And I'm going to remind you, everybody's going to have an opinion. Some of them you're going to like, and some of them you're not going to like. And it's everybody's opinion, okay? It's not for you to tell me how I'm going to rule on these things, but I am going to remind everybody that when we talked about questions relating to the topic, the application that are out of the mandate of this committee, they include the potential funding and where that's coming from, any alternate programs for potential users, activities or characteristics of potential users, including smoking, criminal behavior, etc., and the city's 10-year housing and homelessness plan and the Housing First program model. So I just remind you of that. Clarification?
Just quickly, Chair, I just wonder why the difference between the shelter and the residential care facility, why those two aren't about land use. It is. It's about the square footage and how we're going to be using the land.
Sure it is, but we're going to have time for questions later today, right? And you'll have listened to the people that come forward. We'll ask the staff for their perspective on what we've heard. And as far as the comments that are being made about mega shelter, interpretation of what that is, etc., we're going to hear that it's only 15% of the entire building, the application. We're going to hear things like that from different people, right? So thank you, Mr. Aubry. We're not finished with you yet because Councillor Fleury has some questions, and then Councillor Nussbaum.
Merci, Monsieur Aubry.
Thank you, Mr. Aubry, for being here today.
In your mind, you may not have stated this clearly, but but maybe you can confirm that you'd like for the City of Ottawa to remove any shelter right from any of our zoning to align with the guiding documents. maybe to that you could speak to the current land use impacts of these shelters. What in your mind doesn't work, and what sort of impact does that have on existing communities?
I mean, that's a tough one. But we know that this is a group of people who use shelters, who are stigmatized. They're some of our most marginalized citizens in the city. And there's a real problem when you increase the numbers, because it feeds that stigma and it feeds that marginalization. And I think that's one of my difficulties with an institution of this size. And again, getting back to my argument, to tie it to zoning, I just think that this ultimately is a 350-bed shelter, not a 150-bed shelter.
Okay. So could you clarify that in your mind, I know we have the application today, but in your mind, we should not allow shelters to rest in a permitted, in any of our permissions across the city? Is that, would you go as far as that? That you wouldn't allow for shelters to be built in the first place?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, unfortunately, we need emergency shelters. I mean, people get displaced for all sorts of reasons. So we're gonna need emergency shelters. I'm not, I wouldn't take the position that we can't have them. They should be smaller, though, and we should get people out of them as quickly as possible. And we now have the social know-how to do that. I guess that's the one of the points I'm trying to make here.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nussbaum?
Good morning, and thank you, Professor Aubry, for your remarks. I want to focus my question on land use, and I'm just going to read you quickly 2 sentences, the first from the staff report. And the staff report says, while the official plan and zoning bylaw cannot regulate how social services are provided, from a land use perspective, there are efficiencies in providing compatible social services on the same site. Now, the second sentence I'm going to read to you is from the 2013 report on Housing First, called Housing First in Canada. You probably know it well. And in one of the case studies, Lethbridge, Alberta, there's reference to land use as well, which has a very different perspective on the relationship between land use and social services, and let me read it out. An integrated service delivery model is essential, but is often misunderstood as a centralized service where all programs are run out of the same building. In fact, overly centralized service delivery can undermine efforts to move people out of homelessness. The land use separation of services is very important. So I'm curious between those 2 perspectives. The staff view that from a land use perspective, there are efficiencies in having compatible social services on the same site. And the lesson from Lethbridge and the Housing First report that I alluded to, which argues that land use separation of those services is important. Could you offer your perspective on those 2 positions on land use and separation of social services?
Yeah, I'm not aware, and there might be, but I'm not aware of any research that suggests that centralizing services is better in some way. But I will say, where we're moving in social services, and this includes in the whole area of trying to treat, trying to work with people, support people who are experiencing homelessness, is we're trying to integrate them in the community. And the problem with centralized services is it works against that. And that's one of the central tenets of Housing First, is getting people scattered throughout the community and bringing the services to them. And I think that's the principle that we should be following, rather than clustering everything together and, again, feeding the marginalization of these folks.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Aubry, for coming forward today.
Thank you.
Next up is Katie Oppen, and to take Mr. Aubry's seat is Mark Kaluski. Mark, if you're here, come. Kaluski, as in husky, you said. Okay, Kaluski. If I really torture somebody's name, please just correct it when you come forward. I'm going to try my best. But before we do, an anonymous person gave an anonymous note to one of the staff here, and it says that somebody passed on the question, how can we get a fair hearing when many committee members keep leaving their seats and or walking around? So just so that you know, it's what we do. When we go into, for example, if I wanted to go and get a coffee or a drink or whatever through any of the 3 days, I can go in that door and I have that there. I also have the mic on in there. We hear that, we constantly hear it. Sometimes you're going to see Vice Chair Tierney talking with me. We're talking about whether or not it's the presentation is whatever, or any kind of questions. You'll see other councillors, and not everybody here is a member of the planning committee. So you have engaged councillors that are here because they want to hear from you, right? They don't have to be here, they're here. So when they go to ask questions of a staff person or whatever, I want you to think about the fact that they're interested in what you're saying and they want clarification, or they want the opinion of, for example, you may see me talking to Chair Deans, who chairs the Community Protective Services Committee. It's what we do. It's not different today. It's how we make our best judgments and listen to people at the same time. So I hope that clears that up. Now we'll go over to, is it Oppen?
Yes, Oppen.
Okay, thank you for coming out, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
So I'm representing myself. I'm also representing the Ottawa-Vanier New Democrats provincial and the provincial president. So I'm representing the views of our executive, of our members, the residents of Ottawa-Vanier who came out to speak with us at a workshop that we had. I'm representing the policies of the Ontario New Democrats. And also I hope that I'm representing the interests of the homeless themselves, who have not been consulted and are not here to speak on this issue. So the Ottawa-Vanier New Democrats very much want to support homeless people to find emergency shelter when they need it. However, the New Democrats believe that the real solution to homelessness is to invest in long-term affordable housing. We also appreciate the Salvation Army's long history of community service. However, this proposal for a very large emergency shelter, short-term housing, and limited social support services for men only is insufficiently aligned with the city's bylaws, policies, and plans. This is not intensification in the true sense of the word. It's not permanent housing, it's transient. It does not support the daily life and functioning of the community, and it does not complement existing uses of the main street and the neighborhood. They address the noise and the light and the other sorts of impacts, but not the impact on the community itself in these larger terms. As stated on the city's website, the Planning Committee has a responsibility to, and I quote, ensure coordination and consultation with other standing committees and departments where responsibilities overlap on planning matters and on issues relevant to the mandate of more than one committee. I would argue that this very much overlaps with the other committees, including the Community Protection Committee. Clearly, this decision is more than just deciding whether a site needs a larger parking lot or a different set-asides. Quoting from the official plan, the city uses the community design plan process and collaborative planning to both empower the community, that's us, and achieve the objectives of the official plan at the local level, at our main street. The variance requested, while seemingly a small amendment to the official plan, a plan developed over many years of consultation with citizens and lots of research, is actually a very large departure from many other long-standing, thoughtful, and well-supported policies and plans of the city and its citizens. These policies are intended to guide the city's realization, the making real, of its social objectives, that is to create viable communities and a healthy, vibrant city. The committee's decision and the Salvation Army proposal should also be in alignment with the Montreal Road District Secondary Plan, Housing First Policy. I know we've said you're not going to consider that, but I would argue that this is very much apropos to this discussion. We propose instead that the Salvation Army build a series of multiple smaller emergency shelters, short-term housing options, and support services spread out across the city in areas that are underserviced now. Vanier is not the only neighborhood with a homeless population. Despite the numbers reported by the city, homelessness is increasing in Ottawa. Many homeless people are invisible, especially homeless women and children, and who are not captured by the city's surveys. And they don't all live in Vanier or even in the downtown core. There are homeless people in every part of Ottawa, in rural and suburban areas, and in wealthy neighborhoods too. The tragedy is that they have even fewer services available in their own neighborhoods, and they're forced to seek out support in the city center, far from their traditional support networks of friends and family. Many of them are not even from Ottawa, as we heard earlier, but find themselves here because services are in such short supply in rural areas and smaller centers in Ontario, Quebec, and across the country. The Ottawa Vanier New Democrats would welcome smaller, integrated, decentralized shelters, housing options, and support services in our neighborhood if they align with the existing zoning and planning requirements, and if they are accessible to women, families, and children, not just men. It's undeniable that this very large temporary shelter for men only will have immediate and long-term negative effects on the character and culture of the Quartier Vanier, reversing all the work done in recent years to create a vibrant, safe, healthy, inclusive, equitable, and prosperous community with a unique cultural and historic character. Who's going to benefit from this? It's not the homeless population, it's not the community of Vanier, and it's not even the city of Ottawa. This large emergency shelter for men only is not the answer today or for the future. The Ottawa Vanier New Democrats ask that you deny this variance to the official plan. This is a much larger issue than can be dealt with by a zoning variance. The proposal should be discussed and reviewed by the full complement.
Thank you for your presentation. So we have no questions. Thank you for coming out today. Next up is speaking is Gord Diamond, followed by Mark Koleski and David Seba. Would, if you would come and take Ms. Oppin's seat, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Diamond.
Chair Harder and councillors, my name, as you just heard, is Gordon Diamond, and I've been a resident of the Byward Market for 16 years. And I might say, Chair Harder, you remember it's been a long time since I sat in this seat answering questions about transit. But today I'm here in my capacity as co-chair of the Byward Market Safety and Security Committee. You have a letter expressing strong support for the Salvation Army's plan, which I signed, along with Phil Wasserman, who is the co-chair of the Byward Market BIA, Steve Manuck, co-chair of the BIA and Safety and Security Committee. The Byward Market BIA has also submitted a petition of support with names and signatures of many BIA business members and employees. I'm also here in another capacity as president of the board of directors of the St. George Condominium Corporation at 160 George Street, which is directly across the street from the Booth Center. I represent more than 235 residents and business employees in the St. George who also want to see a new purpose-built Salvation Army facility. And petitions of support with several hundred names and signatures have also been submitted by 4 condominiums in the market and downtown area. As your city planning staff have indicated, the market area has changed considerably in the past 15 years. When I moved into the St. George in 2001, it was the only condominium residence in the neighborhood. There are now 14 more, some numbering 28 stories, plus townhouses and apartments, and others planned. The reality is, developers continue to build new residences near the Salvation Army Booth Center and other shelters, and people continue to buy and move into the neighborhood because it's a great place to live. A number of embassies have also chosen to locate in the Byward Market. One located for many years on the opposite corner of the street from the Booth Center. Ambassadors, embassy staff, members of Parliament, and their families have chosen the St. George to live, and they still do. Our small residential community of a few hundred has grown to several thousand and continues to grow. The cooperative community that has been encouraged and fostered with shelters, other organizations, residents, businesses over the past many years does not support the NIMBY arguments voiced in Vanier. Contrary to some claims, the existence of the Booth Center and other shelters close by has not caused property values to decrease. In fact, they've increased considerably. My own condo, for example, has more than doubled in value since I moved in. Living in the St. George for all this time has given me a front row seat and a unique opportunity to observe and interact with the clients of the Salvation Army Booth Center, walking my dog, going shopping, going visit other people, talking to many. It was obvious from the outset that their facility was inadequate to provide the proper space to deliver the necessary services to people they were trying to help. As a result, these people, many of whom are in need of assistance, spend most of their time out in front on the sidewalk, where they're vulnerable to negative influences. Many discussions and meetings with the Salvation Army senior staff looking for solutions convinced me that their building was inadequate and there was no opportunity to reconfigure it in the current location. The new facility will change all that and ease the concentration of shelters in the downtown. In conclusion, I urge you to approve the Salvation Army application as endorsed by the city planning staff so that their clients will get the help they so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Diamond. We do have a couple of questions. Conseiller Fleury, and then followed by Councillor Brockington.
Hi, Mr. Diamond. Thank you for being here. I have a few questions relating to the current impacts that you've had as a condo president across the street. Can you maybe highlight some of the efforts the condo has done and some of the challenges you keep seeing in and around your property?
I'm not quite sure what you meant by impasse. What are you talking about?
Well, you seem comfortable with what you describe as a decentralization, and I'm curious to see what do you feel would change in and around your condo?
If the facility moved?
If the facility moved, yes.
Well, there'll be more development. There'll be more commercial development. There's a new hotel there, as you know already. More
just
condos.
a minute, just Mr. Diamond. Okay, when you all come up here, when it's your turn to come up and speak, I hope that people are polite to you and not calling out. This is part of the heckling. We're not having it. Councillor Fleury asked a question of one of his residents, and I want him to have the time to respond.
So there's a condominium plan at the former site of the Honest Lawyer. It's on delay right now, but it will eventually go up. That's another 20-odd story one on that same street, right next door to the current Booth Center. And I suspect with the move out of the George Street and the sale of that property, it will generate money in order to complete this whole project. Another residential commercial complex will go up.
I just want to go back to my initial question, which is, you stand here today being comfortable with relocation on the basis that there are current issues with the shelter. I'd like for you to be a bit clear on what those are.
Well, the principal one I just mentioned was that they don't have a space for their customers, their clients, the people who use the services to gather off the street. And that's the big limitation of the current site. The new plan, as you saw, allows for that kind of space. So they'll be separate from the street and be able to socialize.
And just to highlight, so the impacts that you're talking on the street, is that drug use, is that smoking?
No, that's not.
Well, I just want to clarify the delegation.
I think he's trying to answer as well as he can, and you keep going back to him. So I think, unless you have something else to add, do you, Mr. Diamond?
No, the temptations and the problems on the street that challenge some of the customers of the Salvation Army are there, as they are across the whole city. But those have all been mitigated recently by security efforts that they put forward.
Okay, and on another element, you spoke to the decentralization out of downtown of the services. We're now a big city. Would you consider Vanier as part of the downtown?
It's a main street, as the planning department described, and since both of those sites are in your ward, the move of the current Booth Street Centre out to Vanier and Montreal Road will still be in your ward, and as they said, the total number of major shelters will remain at 4.
Well, we're not at 4, but I just want to clarify. You're saying that Vanier is not in Ottawa's downtown?
I think he answered that. You asked him once, he said that they're both in your ward.
I was just unclear. I didn't ask about the shelter component. I asked if Vanier was downtown.
My comment, Councillor, was that the 3 shelters that are now there, the Ottawa Mission, the Shepherds, and the Booth Street site, are the principal shelters.
With all due respect, Mr. Diamond, I'm not speaking of the shelter. I'm asking you brought forward that we were decentralizing the shelters from our downtown. I'm just asking you a simple question.
Yeah, moving one of them out.
Do you believe that Vanier is in our city's downtown?
Close.
Thank you.
Well, I guess the next speaker could ask, is Hintonburg in our downtown? Somebody wanted to ask that too. So any other questions, Councillor Fleury? Okay, Councillor Brockington has questions for you, Mr. Diamond.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Diamond, for your presentation. And you said that the Byward Market's a great place to live. I haven't lived there, but I certainly agree with you that the Byward Market is a great place. And you mentioned that property values over time have gone up, even with shelters like the Salvation Army present. I don't think the Vanier concerns are NIMBYism per se. I think there are a lot of planning issues and other social issues that are legitimate that are being raised today and we have to listen to. And I guess when I look at delegation from the Byward Market Association and the condo directly across the street, it's, I guess, opposite NIMBYism. Here's the opportunity to have a shelter leave your immediate area and across the street from where you live, and of course you're here to support that. So how can you accuse one neighborhood of being NIMBY residents when you're in fact here speaking today to ensure that this leaves the immediate area? I don't understand how you could make that statement.
Are you asking for a reply? No.
It is up to you, Mr. Diamond. I don't know. He's even not telling you that.
The thrust of my presentation was that I've watched this for 16 years. I don't know that the people in Vanier who are making comments about the potential for this site to move out to Vanier have seen what I've seen and understand. Most of the customers of the Salvation Army are they have challenges, some of them mental challenges and other addictions, but they are generally ruly. They follow regulations. They don't cause us much problem at all. It's the other people who try to prey on them are the ones that cause us problems. And so we want them to have a better chance, and we think this new facility, wherever it is, will provide that chance.
Thank you, Mr. Diamond, for coming out today. Next up is Mark Koluski, David Seba, and when Mr. Diamond leaves his seat, Eli or Ellie Garib. Come forward, please, and take that seat. So over to you, Mr. Koluski.
Thank
you
you.
have 5 minutes. Thank you.
I'm here today on behalf of the merchants of Montreal Road. I'm the chair of the Quartier Vanier BIA, and I'm here to share their views on this proposal. As you know, main streets and the surrounding communities are essential to the economic development of cities and are our top criteria when new out-of-town talent is seeking to relocate to a new city. The ability to have thriving main streets enhances our neighborhoods, promotes tourism, city pride, and ensures that shopping and entertainment dollars remain in our city. A decision to set a precedent to modify the traditional Main Street definition to allow for an emergency shelter on a street that is designated for economic development is irresponsible and undermines the work undertaken on enhancing economic diversity and development in Vanier. As per the scope of this committee, I will limit my comments strictly to planning aspects. This is a land use issue. Traditionally, exemptions are sought when two different planning policies are at odds with one another, and it usually comes down to height restrictions, exemptions that are granted based on the city's intensification goals, not land use. You're being asked today to allow something that was never intended in either the traditional Main Street designation nor the secondary plan. These designations and plans are made with specific goals in mind, and investors and developers want certainty and make major investments based on the inflexibility of those plans. Opening up the definition lowers the confidence in the plans and scares investment away. This shelter does not meet the urban planning goals. It goes against the TM designation that does not list a shelter as an acceptable use. TM has a commercial objective. What are the commercial objectives of this project? This project also goes against the 2014 secondary plan for Montreal Road, which is designed to attract new investment to Montreal Road through generous exemptions to height restrictions and strong intensification policies. The proposal also runs counter to Ontario's 2014 provincial policy statement under the Planning Act, which states that the viability and vitality of main streets need to be enhanced where possible, as well as creating opportunities for sustainable economic development. Based on these three principles alone, there's no justification that allows shelters on main streets or on Montreal Road. In the 2008 City Council directive, it was advised that shelters should not be within 500 meters of each other and that a limit of 4 in any ward should be maintained. I understand that this was never formally incorporated into bylaw and that the current City Council is not beholden to this hard rule. However, when making planning decisions, this policy advice should have been given strong consideration in the staff report. Look at the policy objective. Why did the city think that locating many shelters in one ward was inappropriate in 2008? Why does the mayor want the shelters spread out and out of the tourist downtown core? Beyond the issue of zoning, there's a real concern of the business impact on Montreal Road when considering the safety and security of the street. The Salvation Army has not shown any ability to manage the negative activity around its premises. There will be an increase on EMS service calls to the address. In the last 5 years, the Booth Street facility had 3,300 calls, whereas the current location only had 300, more than 10 times increase. They have stated that part of the reason for the high volume of calls is the side-by-side nature of the detox center and the shelter beds, yet they're proposing the exact same model here. Salvation Army is not willing to manage alcohol, drug use, and smoking on its premises, and have told us that any consumption of these substances will be pushed onto Montreal Road. We do not want, nor is it fair to the business community, to transpose the problems at George Street Booth Center to the commercial heart of Vanier. In a few minutes, you'll hear from landlords who, since the announcement of the SA's plan, have lost deals, had to lower rents to convince tenants to stay. This will further encourage them to accept lesser quality tenants, pawn shops, marijuana dispensaries, payday loans, all this hampering the economic growth and potential prosperity. Montreal Road already has a lack of retail services mix, a lack of development, the most concentration of payday loans in Ottawa, and 5 pot shops. I feel confident expressing these feelings on behalf of the 150 businesses and property owners on Montreal Road because since the announcement, there has not been one business come up to us in support of this project. In concluding, there is a bigger point to be made here, and that is the precedent you would set if you were to allow a shelter on any main street in Ottawa. Forget Vanier for a moment. We all have visions of a thriving local main street, and a shelter simply does not fit that vision. If we allow a mega shelter on one main street, it opens the door for shelter to be located on Elgin Street, Spark Street, Richmond Road, Bank Street, and the Glebe. Can you picture it on any of those? Then it shouldn't be allowed on Montreal Road. We request that you uphold the principles of the TM designation, as well as the concepts of the secondary plan in order to assure builders, developers, entrepreneurs, and other economic development partners remain confident in the city's planning policies. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we have questions from Councillor Fleury. Councillor Fleury?
Merci Marc, merci d'être ici ce matin.
Thank you for being here. And we are on the board for many years of the Business Improvement Association, Vanier.
Economic suppression of some of the, since the proposal, but as you've stated also, Vanier does have an issue, especially along Montreal Road, in terms of business mix. And you highlighted payday lenders, but maybe you can highlight speaking to some of the landowners, speaking to some of the businesses, and I know we'll hear from some, so maybe not those who are here today, but from others who aren't here today about what you're seeing in terms of the mix, the business mix issues along that corridor.
Absolutely. So as the BIA, we're often privy to some of the early stage discussions about potential retail or services coming to our main streets. So we often hear about, we try to mix property owners with potential businesses. And what we've heard time and time and again is all plans, anyone having any thoughts of moving into Montreal Road have put those plans on pause or have thought about having a second thought. As you said, we have about 5 or 6 property owners who are going to say the same story. So in terms of retail mix, what we have on Montreal Road, as I mentioned, we have pot shops, we have pawn shops, we have very few restaurants, we have very few, businesses that are thriving other than social services. And I strongly believe that this will hamper the efforts we've been undertaking to try to increase that or to try to have a better retail mix.
And could you speak specifically, you're a business owner, when you look at a corridor, when you look at an investment, what would an influx, or as you highlighted, the per capita were the highest in the province for payday lending, what does that mean for you as a community investor?
Well, to be honest, it just doesn't look good. I mean, we've been with site selectors who drive down Montreal Road and they see the mix that's there, and the lack of economic success breeds more lack of economic success. They'll drive by and say, well, I'm not going to put my beautiful new building beside, sandwiched between a pawn shop and a pot dispensary and a payday loan place. So that's really what we're finding. It's always an uphill battle, and we had great vision for what the Concord Motel site could be, and what they're proposing just works completely against that.
And you were part of the secondary plan efforts that was completed in 2014 and approved by the city. Speaking of the traditional Main Street, ground floor commercial, what sort of ground floor commercial activity mix would you like to see? What's missing along the corridor?
We're definitely missing, in great numbers, a good service mix in terms of restaurants, bars, places for people to go, entertainment. As we all know, retail is having a hard time in general, but we would love to see there are smaller stores that could be opening up in Montreal Road with the cheaper rents that we have. And we're just not seeing any ability to create that sort of positive momentum where, an interesting restaurant breeds another interesting restaurant, or a cluster of bridal gown stores, start all working together. Once some of them start coming, the rest start coming, but the opposite effect will also happen in this case.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for coming out today. Okay. Now, how am I saying your name? David Sipa? Okay, before you start, I just want to call a dual presenter to take your seat. Joseph Ibrahim and Natalie Carriera. So if you're coming up together, you only have 5 minutes between the two of you. Are you both here and both coming up? Okay, so and is it Eli, or is it Eli? That's great. Thank you for moving over. Okay, so David Siba, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much for coming out.
Yeah, so I'm here to speak about the planning issue of land use on the traditional Main Street on Montreal Road.
Can we just get you to get close to the microphone, please?
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, there you go. So my name is David Seva, and I, along with my wife, I came here to Canada back in 2013. In 2015, we got a place on Montreal Road. We opened our bakery, Quelque Chose Pâtisserie. Now we have 3 operations. The one in Vanier, which is our first, where we do all the production. Then we have a second at Westboro, a third at Le Promenade in Gatineau, and we'll have a 4th one at the Bylaw market. In our first year of business, we were succeeding in Vanier, but in the past year, since the increase of marijuana shops and the reduction in crime prevention programs by the city, we have seen a sharp decline in business. Crime is up in Vanier. Things are getting worse in Vanier, despite the Quartier Vanier BIA efforts, including the 2016 ad campaign. That's me on the picture. That's our first bakery. That's our showcase. I just want you guys to see what it looks like, Montreal Road. As you can see at the Wabano Center, it's empty. That's during the week. So that's how it looks, Montreal Road. No pedestrian there. Between the Wabano Center and the Salvation Army thrift store, It's an abandoned food market with a for lease sign in the window. I've seen that sign ever since I got here in Canada 4 years ago, and it's the same sign. The thrift store and Concord Motel are facing a Money Mart payday loan shop across the street, a business that preys on your most vulnerables. Heading west from 333 Montreal Road, a block away, is a wheat shop and a now for lease beauty salon with another payday loan shop above. A block up is the Cartier Vanier BIA office with another payday loan shop and a pawn shop next door. That's like all next to it, like door to door. The confectioner is now closed, but the payday loan shop and pawn shop continue to prey on residents. Kitty corner to Cartier Vanier office is the store, like quelque chose, right in the corner. We were doing well. Like, it was hard for us to start there, but we had a really good product, and we were bringing people from all over Ontario and Quebec. We did so well that we somehow managed to open more stores in Ottawa and Gatineau. Last year, things started to get worse. Sales dropped. What I've seen in my second shop at Westboro, people going there, people from Vanier going to Westboro to buy our products and telling me, hey, you know what? I'd rather drive 20 minutes to go to Westboro than going there because of the smell of the wheat shop next door, people standing right at the window of our shops, fighting, women of the night standing there all day. They'd rather drive 20 minutes to go to Westboro than just walk 2 minutes to go there. Next to us, an abandoned restaurant. It's been like that forever. Across the street from that restaurant is an old sports store that has not been open in years, and upstairs in the property is a crack house. Up ahead on the next block is a 4-story tower that is 40% vacant, and a marijuana bong shop. Across from the bong shop is a vacant lot. Note that there are few pedestrians on a sunny day. It's empty. Next to the lot is the LCBO and an abandoned building. More abandoned buildings. There used to be a nice comic book store. They just moved to center town because they saw no future there, I guess. That's the one. They just moved.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Councillor McKenney has a question for you.
Yeah.
Councillor McKenney?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious as I listen to your presentation and some of the others, what, and our decision as we sit here and listen to delegations through the next 2-3 days, our decision has to be made on land use for this report and what is the best use of land, specifically on our traditional main streets. And it'll be a difficult decision, there's no doubt. But I have to say that the narrative that I've heard for the last almost 3 hours, I have some difficulty with. I represent a part of the city that has a large population that are disadvantaged, that are have less than others, that are living in poverty, whether they're in rooming houses or in different types of shelters. And it's not my experience that those folks bring down a neighborhood. It's my experience that those people need our help and turn to either the city or the people who provide services on our behalf. And sometimes, if things aren't working, we have to look at what is in place. But the narrative I'm hearing today, I'm having a bit of trouble with, because it seems to me that part of it is, if people a lot of poor people live together, it will bring down a neighborhood, and I don't believe that to be true. I actually, I don't believe that to be true. There's absolutely nothing in the neighborhoods that I represent that would confirm that. So I just wonder what it is about this particular recommended site and the land use that would make things worse for you in Vanier today, and what it is, why are things so bad, and what it is about the land use that is being recommended here that would make it worse for your business.
Okay, just to give you an example, I have a friend, he owns a restaurant in Chinatown. He wanted to open a restaurant on Montreal Road. As soon as he heard the news about the shelter, that's it. He's not doing anything there.
Yeah, but that's not answering my question. Sorry, you're not
sorry.
answering my question. I'm not asking for examples of people who have not moved into Vanier with their businesses.
Yeah.
What I'm asking you is, what is it about how this land is being proposed to be used that would have a further negative impact on your business?
There's a lot of issues as it is now. Like, as it is now, Montreal Road, there's a lot of issues that we should work on before we take such a project as a shelter. That's my opinion, and it affects as soon as the news came out, our sales went down, just as the news of the new shelter came out. Just the news. Imagine once we have the building right there.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for coming out today. Okay. So taking David's seat will be Mahar Arar. If you're here, please come and take that seat. And so now I'm going to go to, now how do you say your last name?
Garib, G-H-A-R-I-B, Garib, Eli.
Garib. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Okay, I just said my name. I'm a real estate broker, and I've been investing in Vanier for a long time. I'm here today to speak to the planning issue of land use. The bottom line is that shelter do not belong on traditional Main Street. Traditional Main Street is a term used to refer to a planning zone in the city official plan. The purpose of the zone is to, number one, accommodate a broad range of land uses, example, retail, office, residential. Number two, promote compact mixed use, pedestrian-oriented development. Number three, recognize the function of business improvement areas as primary business and shopping areas. Number four, impose development standard to ensure that street continuity, scale, and character is maintained, and that uses are compatible and complement surrounding land uses. I am the owner of 90, 92, 94, and 99 Montreal Road. 99 Montreal Road is a building located next to the Tim Horton. Also used to be Derringer. I bought this building in March 2015 after the BIA sold me on a promise of Vanier being a traditional Main Street that was slated for street improvement, and that there were plans for other desirable businesses to move to Montreal Road. In 2016, I spent the year completing a major renovation, spending almost $200K on the premises. In the spring of 2017, a major franchise approached me about leasing my space at 99 Montreal Road. Getting this major franchise to sign a lease required me to do further upgrade of electrical and much more. Our lease negotiations started in April, and in June of this year, the franchise had sent me a letter of intent to lease 99 Montreal Road. But by the end of June, When the Salvation Army development application was announced, the franchise just walked away. I have many properties in Vanier and hoped that Vanier was going to become the next thriving neighborhood. My investments were made on Montreal Road based on the zoning being upheld and protected, and now the bylaw is being changed for a mega shelter. The business impact is so negative already, and the Salvation Army development has not yet been approved. This mega shelter will set us back and worsen Vanier traditional Main Street.
Thank you, sir. See if we have no questions. Thank you for coming out today.
Thanks.
Okay, so to take over from, hang on, I'm just updating my list here. From Mr. Garib, the next person to come forward is Kathy Orfale. Kathy, are you here? Kathy Orfale. Thank you. Come on down. So next up, we have Joseph Ibrahim and Natalie Carriere, and you have 5 minutes between the two of you. As soon as you start, we'll start that, followed by Mahar Arar, and then, as I said, Kathy Orfale. Welcome. Can you, there you go.
I am here today to discuss a matter pertaining to land use in Ward 12. I have made property investment in Vanier on its traditional main street of Montreal Road since 1985. We have hoped every 10 years that Vanier will improve. We hope that when they fix the sidewalk on Montreal Road back about 20 years ago, that will help the business, but business mix is getting worse. The hard drugs and prostitution are seriously issue on our traditional main street of Montreal Road. Most of my rental are at least 25% below the market and taxation rate. With the announcement of the Salvation Army development, that is causing rental to reduce even more on renewal. I already have to keep rent somewhere under market value to keep tenant happy in Vanier. My tenant, quelque chose, who just spoke a few minutes ago, is upscale bakery that makes macarons that are famous citywide. The one tenant that I have that is opening other franchise in the city. And now quelque chose want to leave. So what else can we do now as landlord? We have rent to pot shop and payday loan shop because that's the only potential tenant willing to pay nearly market value. And yet pot shop and payday loan shop prepay on the most vulnerability. Excuse me. That's the incident to get better tenant when the city are not protecting our investment. In November 2016, I purchased two-story mixed-use commercial and residential property at 414 Montreal Road, 1 block from the Salvation Army site. I am in the process of renewing the building. I have worked very hard to bring a good tenant. I started negotiate with pastry shop owner in the spring of 2017, and he was very keen to lease my property until he heard about the Salvation Army development, he is considering whether to proceed with leasing, and he is here with me today. I can't make a living on this traditional main street if the city does not invest, and unable investment that is responsible and that fit within the commercial objective of the Montreal Road secondary plan. Thank you.
Je vais lire pour Dominique Favre, qui
I'm going to talk for Dominique Favre, who is here and who would want to. I'm Dominique Favre. I'm French from Venezuela, but the unstable situation of my country has forced me to come and settle in Canada. I am a baker, and I'd like to open a shop at 414 Montreal Road in the francophone part of the city. Mr. Ibrahim offered me something very interesting. Mr. Ibrahim has already renovated the place. Mr. Armirois has contacted with an architect and discussed a plan for the place, but I've heard that the Salvation Army wanted to open a center, and that could put in peril the reputation of the country.
went off, so I wasn't sure if I didn't hear it. Well, essentially, it just finishes off by saying that the man, Dominique Favre, who is sitting back there, he just left, would have and was going to settle into Vanier and bring about another business that would be of interest to the community.
Thank you very much.
Not doing it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for coming out. So so you can leave your seats, please. And taking your seat will be Peter Hyde. Peter, if you're here, come on forward. And so we'll go back to you, sir. Mr. Arar, you have 5 minutes.
Everyone. I own a property at 261 Montreal Road. It's a 4-story office building. It's only steps away from the Salvation Army project, and I've owned this building for about 10 years. I just want to tell you a story that happened last year, which is very important for all of the attendees to grasp the reality of day-to-day life in Vanier. I was interviewed by a CBC journalist last year because I have an office at that building, so I met her there. And then after the interview, I walked with her to the parking lot, and we were surprised to see that not surprised maybe, but we were shocked to see that her car was broken into and her purse was stolen. And mind you, the interview was only 10 minutes long, so that's how long it took for someone to go into her car and steal her purse. Of course, she became emotional, she started crying, and we had to call the police, but the irony is, she actually was one of the journalists who broke a story about purses being stolen just 2 weeks ago. She was actually on TV publicly warning citizens not to leave their purses in the car. And what I want to say, this is the norm in Vanier. It is not the exception. And I can tell you that because I've owned the building for 10 years. I know Vanier inside out. And if you ever wonder why at 47 years of age I have this gray hair on my beard, half of it has to do with Vanier, and the other half has to do with what happened to me. But so let me tell you, I've been suffering like my other fellow business owners and landlords with respect to filling the space. The building has been vacant 40% vacant for about 8 years now, and I have changed agents 4 times. I thought maybe it was the agent who was not doing a good job, and to no avail. So finally, I have decided to take things into my own hands, and I did not fire my agent yet, but I am turning this vacant space into a co-working space. So basically the announcement came as a bomb for me because I had already started investing. And the idea was for me to attract high-tech and freelancers to the area. In fact, I contacted Uber, tried to lure them. Maybe I was naive, to lure them to my building, and we didn't get anywhere. So I think the project is in contradiction with what the city has a plan for that main street. The city, if they approve this project, they are actually sending mixed signals to the residents and the businesses. And why am I saying this? Because I'm sure you all know that the city is abolishing the vacancy rebate. And you know, it wasn't much, but it was still helping. So landlords will even suffer more. And just to answer the councillor's question with respect to, you know, when he asked David about what he thinks, but it doesn't matter what the reality is. What matters is perception. And I can tell you for the last few months, our inquiries dropped significantly. We're not even getting any more inquiries about leasing space in the building. So in my opinion, this project, if you approve it, it will make a lot of people suffer. Not only the journalists will cry, there will be residents and thousands of them crying. There will be you know, business owners, landlords, and most importantly, the crime rate will go up and more people will suffer and those victims will cry as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We do have a question for you from Conseiller Fleury.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Good day.
More to consistency. So you bought the property 10 years ago. You knew the zoning that was permitting the different uses along the corridor. I'd love to hear from you on the type of businesses you expected to come as an investment along the corridor to make your investment valuable and to promote the community overall. So I'd love to hear, you know, when you bought in, you knew about the zoning on the corridor, you knew about the mixed commercial goals. What expectations did you have from that?
Well, my motivation for buying a building in Vanier was like anyone else. Like, you know, Eli said that, you know, I thought Vanier was going to be the next Westboro. And that's one motivation. Obviously, there was more other motivation because I thought, you know, the community needs some services and needs some, you know, some activity in the area. So I have 2 dentists on the 4th floor as anchor tenants for the building. So I was expecting more dentists, more doctors, more lawyers, and also because I have a tech background, I was really trying my best to attract some entrepreneurs and startups to that neighborhood, but it's never worked. And I'm worried now with this project going on. To be honest, I'm still going ahead with my co-working space because I've already started, and I really don't know why we are here today, frankly. If you want to discuss things purely on technical things, be my guest. But if you want to look at the social impact, it's going to have a huge, huge negative social impact. And it does not take a rocket scientist to tell you this. It doesn't take reports or anything. It's just the reality. It's a 5-year-old kid would tell you it's going to have a negative social impact. And please imagine if this project is going to your neighborhood. What would you say? Just please. And again, I'm not against the project. Salvation Army is a respected organization, has been doing great work for long years. But what I find controversial here is that everything was done and then the community was being consulted. And I think the Salvation Army should have consulted the community as of a year ago. This would have been better for everyone. Thank you.
Oh, you're the staff.
I guess I'm listed as staff.
It came up as staff. I said, what does this say, staff? It's not staff, it's Vice Chair Tierney that has a question.
Mr. Arr, just a quick question. When did you purchase the building and open your business?
May 2008. So in a few months, it will be 10 years.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So our next speaker, as you know, is Kathy Orfali. But when Mr. Arar leaves his seat, I'm going to ask Marie-Josée from Action Logement to come forward. And then that's likely going to be lunchtime, okay? So, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me okay?
You may want to, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. I'm here to discuss my reasons why I'm firmly against the Salvation Army's proposed development for Montreal Road and the required official plan amendment and zoning changes for land use on this main street. Why does this concern me? My family, yes, has owned real estate in Vanier for over a decade, but last April, I purchased a building on Montreal Road, a few hundred meters from the proposed shelter, and will be opening my financial planning company at the building in 2 months. And it's not a payday loan business either. I look forward to serving the Vanier community. Equally important, though, I'm a proud philanthropist. I love to do charity work here and internationally, and I serve on the board of a Canadian charity. I believe in social justice. Social issues matter. My primary issue is that I want to address is that the proposed changes in land use and the zoning in Ward 12 are an issue. When I bought the building last spring, I had hoped for the business community on the Montreal Road, Main Street. And I bought it counting on the fact that the city protected and supported the zoning bylaws for traditional main streets. Also, the official plan and zoning decisions would protect the merchants and businesses and the vitality of Montreal Road. The official plan was put in place to support a socially healthy, strong, productive, and safe community. As an investor and soon-to-be business owner on the Montreal Road Main Street, as well as a very supportive municipal taxpayer, I'm heavily invested in Vanier. But I no longer feel protected by the bylaws and official plan that the city's put in place. If this proposed development goes ahead, the city will in essence have broken a promise to the public, to the Vanier community. One of my tenants at the building mentioned they're not likely to renew their lease if the proposed Salvation Army development goes ahead. Another was asking, will I hire a security guard for the building? Council members, this represents a potential loss of close to $50,000 annual for me. What about the rest of the tenants? This proposal is affecting me personally. Not to mention what kind of new tenants will Montreal Road attract if good tenants leave. The road will look very different. There's a justified fear in the Vanier business community. This proposal, if approved, could be the tipping point for a negative spiral and reversal of progress. Fear always turns into reaction, and ultimately negative actions brought on by fear spread like wildfire. This is exactly what's beginning to happen from the impact of proposed changed land use. Imagine what will happen if this is approved. It would be devastating to our businesses, residents, and youth, not to mention social implications, which are we supposed to talk about those? I'm not sure. Apparently, they're not relevant to the decision before you, but we all know that social impact to a community matters. In changing the land use and zoning in my community, you're sending a message to other Main Street business communities. Watch out, invest at your own risk. Some other items. Will a shelter on the Main Street in Vanier promote a good quality range of businesses? How will the surrounding community feel if this is approved after it's built? How will it look in 5 years? What are the total amount of beds in the shelter? Not 140, but 340. A bed is a bed. They're all used for sleeping. As a society, we know that helping people is always the right thing to do. My question is, what is the right way to help a group of people in society without negatively affecting an entire neighborhood?
1 minute.
There will be an answer. Let's look for better solutions as a community and as a city. In closing, I do understand that not all city staff have to directly represent the public through their decisions, but I also understand that under Section 224 of the Municipal Act, the fundamental role of councillors is to represent the public. Please, I urge you all to represent the public. We, the local businesses and residents of Vanier, and vote against this amendment in the official plan and rezoning and protect our already vulnerable community of Vanier. Vanier deserves to be given the chance to become a vibrant community, just like the other wards in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well said. I don't see any questions here, but thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.
Next up is Peter Hyde, followed by Marie-José. And then just to let all of you know that at that point we're going to take a break for half an hour. And I'm going to remind colleagues again that half an hour will be timing you as well. So we need you back in the seat so we can respect those that have come out today. So Mr. Hyde, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairperson, for the opportunity to speak on this matter. I am a longtime resident of Ottawa. I live in Rockcliffe and frequent Montreal Road for shopping, visiting friends and relatives, and I'm well aware of the area to be affected by this proposal, if it goes ahead. I'm strongly opposed to it for many reasons, and have provided them to the Salvation Army, to which I've given financial support nearly all my working life. I believe it is a great mistake for this significant proposal to proceed without widespread community support. Before any work is done on the proposed site, I recommend it be shelved until a more comprehensive study is undertaken using revised principles. Both the City and Salvation Army would be wise to seriously consider alternatives and avoid wasting time and money to fight the local opposition. The Montreal location is not suitable for heavy traffic, which it will bring, nor is there sufficient street parking available. There will be a significant disruption in Montreal for the 2 years during construction, especially during winter, as well for the thereafter. No amount of improvement that the city has promised will change that. There's a large residential area stretching from the site of the proposed facility up to the Beechwood Cemetery, which includes many families with young children, as already has been pointed out. These folks are not enthused with the possibility of being close to the Salvation Army's proposed facility, and yet letting young kids walk to their school or traveling to and from bus stops in that area. Question was asked of me, will the Salvation Army install fencing to keep those clients inside? The chosen site is situated halfway between the Vanier Parkway and Salra Boulevard, which are major traffic thoroughfares, but being approximately 1 kilometer from each makes it a bit far for walking to and from them, especially those people who are homeless and have difficulties walking. Another location, such as the site of the former Rideau High School or the Target Department Store Shopping Center, which have been vacant for about a year, both of which are on Salra Boulevard and have ample space for parking and other outside activities, would be better choices. With the rise of Amazon and the demise of both Target in Canada and recently Sears, there will be little chance of a big department store locating there. The proposed location is also inconvenient for people coming from the 417 highway and the light rail route currently under construction. And I mean not just clients, there's people servicing the facility. The proposed site will be close to the Wabano Center, which serves Indigenous persons who have different needs, and I understand are not in favor of this project being located close to it. I also just heard that the Montreal Hospital is opposed to this project, and I am a strong supporter of Montreal Hospital and have been for years. Vanier needs new commercial businesses and improvements to the area living conditions, not more homeless people and drug users. The Salvation Army proposed facility will only make it more challenging for Vanier to achieve its objectives. Statistics provided in Mr. Tim Richter's column in today's Ottawa Citizen on page A9 supports it. What would be even better than this proposal would be for the Salvation Army to decentralize their operation and locate them in a number of small locations around the city. Ottawa was spread out over a greater area than Toronto, Montreal, or Edmonton. Hence, it would be far better for them to distribute their operations widely to serve the whole city and provide smaller facilities for homeless in those areas. Ottawa Salis and Robert Smart Centre are a couple of excellent examples of charities which have been very successful doing this without causing community opposition. See also the evidence in Mr. Richter's column that I mentioned earlier. There are many good reasons for splitting the Salvation Army's project into smaller, local-based facilities and avoiding the community's opposition to this mega one. Some experienced people have argued that the Salvation Army needs services designed for community support. Using property tax money to fund shelter bids is a pointless way to solve the homeless issue. Some have argued that support for SOS Vanier organization is marginal, but I can assure you, from what I know, there is widespread support from outside the community as well as Vanier itself. The Salvation Army is a worthwhile organization which I have supported for many years, and I am willing to work with them on alternatives using my considerable experience and knowledge of not-for-profit entities.
Thank you, sir. That's your 5 minutes. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Hyde? Thank you very much for coming out today, sir. Thank you. Marie-José, and then we're going to take a break whenever you're finished, but you have 5 minutes, and then we'll have questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. My name is Marie-José Hull, and I've been working in the affordable housing sector in Ottawa for the last 14 years. And I've worked front lines as a housing coordinator, later held the title of project manager as I developed 4 affordable housing projects scattered across the city, and I still work as a consultant for the co-op housing sector. My last job, I was the executive director for OCISO Nonprofit Housing Corporation, a job that I lived through the death of Abdi Rahman Abdi at the hands of a police on our doorstep. So working with a wide range of vulnerable people is nothing new to me, and I've seen and experienced many things over the past years. So this past January, I was the Vanier Community Center services located at 290 Dupuis, where I was asked to come for a job interview. And while I waited in the reception area, I overheard an older man screaming into the courtesy phone as he perched precariously on his walker. And he screamed, "Do I have to go over there and shoot the place up for me to be understood?" This was my introduction to Vanier. So I did get that job. My new office is located on the 2nd floor at 261 Montreal Road. In fact, Mr. Arar, who spoke earlier, is my landlord. And, you know, the building is where the H&R Block is on the 1st floor. There's a beautiful mural commissioned on the side of it. And my building can also be seen among the payday loans, everything that everyone's described all morning for you. And it's also exactly across the street from the Jean Coutu where someone had his throat slit this summer. So the first thing that struck me about the location of my new job is the quantity of used condoms that surround my car in the parking lot in the back. And as the weather warmed, I saw more and more scantily clad young women covered in bruises from head to toe working the corners and climbing into SUVs. So walking to and from my car, I witnessed countless drug drops that took place around the dumpsters, and at least twice per week, my employees would have to call 911 to bring in the police or the ambulance to pick up people that had either passed out from shooting up at the bottom of our stairwell of our building, or who were hoping to set up a little nest so that they can keep warm during the weekend. Now that the weather is getting colder, these occurrences are increasing in frequency. So since March 1st, I've been the executive director for Action Logement. We're a homelessness prevention organization, but I can tell you that the people that I see on the streets in front and behind my office every day, the people who try to sneak into our office building seeking shelter, are not the people, the individuals that my organization can help. However, and I speak to you as someone who has been working in affordable housing sector for quite a while, These are the individuals that a purpose-built, flexible Salvation Army facility can help. These people are here. You've heard it all morning. They're in Vanier. They're here every day. And that's why the construction of this facility in a proposed location is vital to this community. And these people that require the range of services provided by this shelter are already here. And it's not just shelter services, it is support services. So we've talked about a bed is a bed. That's absolutely untrue. They do need a place to stay, and they also need the supports. So when I talk about homelessness to the public, and tomorrow I'm going to go teach a lecture at University of Ottawa, I quote the following stats. Ottawa has a 2% vacancy rate. There's a huge shortage of rental accommodations in the city. Ottawa has the third highest rents in Canada after Vancouver and Toronto. The vacant units here are not considered to be affordable. Ottawa has 22,000 subsidized units with a waiting list of approximately 11,000, and the list keeps growing. So last year, the emergency family shelters were so full that they put up an average of 40 families in motels every night. This year, that number rose to 200. And with the Canada 150 celebrations, the motels were so full that the family shelters had to relocate people to live in Rockland and in Cornwall. The emergency shelters for single individuals are cracking at the seams. So although housing first seems to be the buzzword of the day, it does not work well for everyone. Besides, there needs to be housing available to run a Housing First program, and at the time, Ottawa has a huge shortage of rental accommodations, never mind affordable housing. So despite the approaching midway point of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan adopted in Ottawa, homelessness in Ottawa continues to grow. And when the plan was adopted in 2013, the picture of homelessness was different.
That's your time is up.
All right,
Thank you very much. We do have a question from Conseiller Fleury.
Yep.
Présidente, Marie-Josée, bienvenue.
Marie-Josée, welcome. It's the first time that we meet. Thank you for your investments in the sector, and I applaud your efforts. You talked about certain problems that you have noticed along the Montreal Road. I don't understand exactly the position. Apparently you're for, but you haven't made a link between what you've seen on the street and the way this proposal is going to solve the problem caused by condoms and drugs. How will this proposal resolve the problem?
Just parce que j'ai préparé. The question from Mr. Fleury was about the link between the things that I've witnessed, the things that everyone has witnessed this morning, and why I'm in favor of the Salvation Army facility. It is going to be purpose-built. It is going to be flexible. So the face of homelessness changed since 2013. There's been a lot of reasons why people have become homeless since then. And since the development of the 10-year plan, we never thought that war would bring people to our doorsteps. We never thought that the flooding in the Outaouais region would make people lose their homes. So my point is that these people, these individuals that need the help are already in Vanier, and they're causing chaos. Everyone has been speaking about it all morning. What's not being spoken is that the services that this new facility will provide, and that its size and its flexibility that will provide, will be able to address a lot of these issues that we see. So people will no longer be loitering on the streets. They will have a place to go. They're not going to try to squat in our buildings over the weekends. They will have a place to go. That's my point.
Okay. And the second aspect, or you began by saying this around your previous work in the sector. You talked about OCISO and more specifically of the investments in scattered units. What can you present? Like, what are the ratios in your mind of density that make sense when you look at different housing types, and more specifically looking at shelters? What in your mind brings enough value for the investment, but not so much that it's unmanageable in terms of location?
Well, I can't speak in terms of shelters because my specialty really was affordable housing, and I do believe in a mixed model of affordable housing. However, that is not a shelter situation. However, this is also what's being proposed for the shelter is a mixed model, not in a mix of income, but a mix of services and emergency beds, and a flexibility to be adaptable while we move through this 10-year housing and homelessness plan. And that's what they're proposing. So I'm sorry, Mr. Fleury, I'm not quite answering your question. I don't feel I have the experience in social service delivery. I'm not a social worker to answer that question fully.
Is that it, Councillor? Councillor Leeper?
Sorry, I'm quite sick today. One of the questions with which this committee is ostensibly seized is whether or not a shelter use belongs on a traditional main street. The city has grappled with traditional main streets and our desire to promote those. We can think about the great traditional main streets that are across the city. I've heard multiple references to Westboro and Hintonburg, for example. We could also cite Bank Street or the Glebe. Does a shelter belong on a traditional main street given what the city's goals are for those types of roads?
Right. And I'm new to the service delivery, so I'm not sure that I can answer that question. I'm sorry. I do feel that, facilities that help people need to be where the people are. And this is where the people are.
So there can be a one-block difference to the next street over, and it's no longer in a traditional main street. We have different goals for different streets. Certainly, Hintonburg is very full of housing for vulnerable populations, but not on the main street. And that is the question with which we are struggling today is, do we amend the secondary plan, the official plan, to allow a shelter use on a main street, not whether to allow a shelter? And that's again, the critical difference that I hope subsequent speakers will come to the table prepared to address. But I do thank you for the presentation. I thank you very much for the contributions that you are making ongoing in your professional capacity.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this morning. And as I said, we're going to have a break. I'm looking at my phone, and we will be back at 1:03. Okay, 1:05. 1:05 to leave. It's time to get out of the room. And everybody, I'm setting the alarm. And I'll turn my phone on. Okay, let's roll.